And I just sat there, and that moment was one of the moments I'll never forget for the rest of my life.
Mm.
Here were patients who had gotten rid of their problems by treating root cause,
Mm.
and I was scared scared for my job and my livelihood and my license that if I told them to carry on, will I get in trouble?
Mm.
But then if I tell them to do what I was taught to say at university, will I bring them their disease back? And I just thought, how can I be put in a position like this?
Mm.
And that's why I think the system is the problem.
Mm.
The guideline system is the problem.
Mm. Amazing. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So I first sort of learnt about your account because I was looking into the whole smoking in Papua New Guinea, which kind of
Very
blew my
interesting.
mind.
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
So I've taken up smoking
Okay.
on your recommendation.
For the record, I do not recommend smoking.
No, that kind of blew me away. And you were talking about, was it the Japan paradox? Was
Yeah.
it?
Japanese smoking paradox.
Yeah. For listeners who don't know what we're talking about, could you explain a little bit about Japan and
course.
New Guinea?
So typically we are told in school, all these things certain things are bad for us in life in general, and smoking is one. And we're told smoking causes cancer.
Right.
And I don't disagree that smoking is bad for us or harmful. I'm completely in line with that. But in order to say that something causes something else, so X causes Y, it has to be a direct causality. And people may think, well, I'm being pedantic, but you have to be pedantic because people's lives are on the line. And this is very, very important. Word choice is important.
Sure.
So if I was to say, for instance, punching a hole in the bottom of a boat causes it to sink, then every time a hole is punched, the boat will sink every single time without fail. And so, okay, that's what causality means.
Sure.
So if smoking causes cancer, that means if you smoke, you will get cancer. But the truth is, when you look at, say, like lung cancer, depending on which statistic you'd like to quote, roughly speaking, maybe 15% of smokers develop lung cancer.
Right.
So in other words, 85% don't develop lung cancer. So why is that? And that's something which has fascinated me for a long time. And I would say that shows that it is more complex than we think. I'm not saying I have all the answers because I don't. I fully admit I don't. But I am saying that as a society, as a scientific community, we don't have all the answers. And we must admit that. That's my goal with that video. And when we see that, and we can find areas of the world which don't fit the conventional narrative that X causes Y, smoking causes cancer. And the research was not done by me. It was done by a great scientist called Stefan Lindeberg. And he studied the population of Papua New Guinea. And he found that, the vast majority of them smoked. And there was no cancer.
Right.
And that goes completely against everything we're told. And I'm sure there is more to it. Absolutely. I don't deny that. But I think it is enough for us to just stop and say, do we know as much as we think we do? That's all I want from that. That's all I want scientists to do. And the Japanese smoking paradox is essentially showing that, there is also a high rate of smoking there. But again, we don't see the things that we would expect to see with that. And lots of people have theories as to why. It's impossible to give an exact 100% certain reason why when you are looking at such a large population over such a large period of time. With so many factors that can't be controlled in an experiment. But again, at the very least, I think it's a reason for us to stop and say, maybe we don't know as much as we think we do. I certainly don't. I don't have all the answers, as I said. But I do believe that there is more to cancer more to smoking and cancer than a simple X causes Y.
Have you heard much about the blue zones?
Yeah, blue zones, it's something which I've looked at for quite a long time. And I think there are a lot of holes in that. And I think a lot of people who quote them and say, look, what happened here, what was found here, this must mean we must do this to live as long as possible. And I think the research in the blue zones don't really stack up. For example, when they looked at, when they went to Italy, if I'm not mistaken, they went during a time of year when it was Lent and people were fasting. So potentially their bodies were in a state of autophagy where it's kind of cleaning up the rubbish and trying to recycle things to make things brand new without being too technical. And when you study a population in that particular state, a metabolic state, you are going to get a very different reading than the other times of the year in the same population. And if you look at populations in the US, so like Linda Loma I think
Which
that is
is
in California.
okay.
There were other confounding variables going on at the same time. There was religious aspects. They were looking at certain sort of habits of smoking and alcohol and things which don't quite stack up to everywhere else.
Mhm.
And when you look at the overall Blue Zone data and you come up with the idea that the Mediterranean diet, quote unquote, is quote unquote healthy or best, or whatever word you want to use, that then leads to even more holes. I mean,
Mm.
what is the Mediterranean diet? I work in Italy. I'm there all the time. Let me tell you, it's not that different to other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And which part of the Mediterranean? And I was having a debate with a doctor on this a couple of months ago in Albania. And I said, so, okay, what is the Mediterranean diet then?
Mm.
And she said, well, okay, it's pasta every single day. And I said, okay, so that's your opinion.
Mhm.
What if someone else thinks it's pasta every other day? Who's right? Where is
Mm.
the official definition of the Mediterranean diet? And she was just sat in silence. And
Mm.
she realized there was no answer to that.
Mhm.
It's just an opinion. And if it is pasta every single day, is that what they were found to be eating during the Blue Zone study?
Mm.
No, it wasn't.
Mm.
So how can you look at that study and say the Mediterranean diet is something completely different to what was in the study?
Yeah,
It
and it
makes no
does.
sense.
Yeah, it varies from location to because there's 7 of them around the world, and I read something.
Yeah,
I think it was about a year ago, and
yeah,
it kind of just came up and then vanished again because Netflix did a bunch of documentaries about the blue zones and said these are magical places, and
yeah,
there was something around people faking their age for tax purposes.
yeah.
So
Because
actually, my
records aren't as reliable,
yeah,
shall
when
we
you've got a
say?
small, mountain village somewhere, so you just lie about your
Absolutely.
age, and then it looks like all these people are living to 110, and actually they're just lying about their
Yeah.
taxes, and that's interesting. Yeah.
There's so many holes to that.
Yeah. And then you've got a difference between, if you're talking about pasta, you've got the varieties and what people are talking about in America with glyphosate. And there's the new thing I saw on the BBC the other day that, what is it? They're introducing folic acid to
Yeah,
bread now in the UK, which is a nightmare. It's a
yeah,
disaster. How
yeah,
do you go about, because you talk quite regularly about your low carb diet.
yeah,
And this is something I'm fascinated by. And I
yeah,
hear a lot of people talk. I got a blood test the other
yeah.
day from the NHS, so it's
Okay,
become a bit more personal because they
okay.
said my what was it? I can't remember. It was non-HDL and HDL I think they gave me,
Yeah,
and it was too high for their recommendations. And all I've
interesting.
heard for years, because I've and that makes sense because I've basically not been on a carnivore. I did that for a little bit,
Yeah,
but I started to introduce fruit, and I'll have a burrito, a pasta in the evening. But it's most of my diet is meat, which I
yeah,
think is the right way to go. I feel so much
absolutely.
better than I used to do.
Yeah.
What is your? Could you explain to people sort of like the new sort of ideas around cholesterol and
Absolutely.
how it? Yeah,
So the conventional narrative is cholesterol is bad.
yeah.
And I don't have any problem with people suggesting things. I think,
Mm,
having a discussion is how things move forward.
mm,
But I think it's also important that we try and really be objective when we look at these things to figure out what the real answer is.
mm,
And again, I don't have all the answers, but I do have a series of thoughts which I think are very interesting, which I think everyone should consider.
mm.
So let's say cholesterol is bad,
Right.
quote unquote. So the first question is, okay, well, where is cholesterol produced in the body? And the answer is the liver.
Mm,
Now, and we say, okay, what is cholesterol bad for? And the conventional narrative, well, it causes heart disease.
mhm,
Okay, fine. So it's bad for the heart.
mm,
So that what you're saying then is the liver is trying to kill the heart. What species over the past 4.6 billion years has survived because one organ tried to kill another? That clearly would not happen.
mm,
So automatically, just with common sense, I think there is a big hole before we even get started.
mhm,
Name me one other animal where one organ tries to kill another. It doesn't exist. So there's part number one. Part number two is if cholesterol was, you know, causal to heart disease, then it means that where there is cholesterol, there is heart disease.
mhm,
So as an example, if we say pollution causes asthma, you look at a map where there is pollution over these grid points, everyone there has asthma. We can say, fine, high coincidence rate. So I think probably, yeah, pollution does cause asthma.
mm,
But where is cholesterol? Well, cholesterol is in, to state the obvious for a second, the blood. However, it's in all of the blood.
mhm,
So if it was causal, it means arterial disease would be in all of the arteries
mhm,
and all of the vessels, I should say, that carry blood. But is it there? No, it's not. It's only in very, very specific points all the time. So is it to do with the blood or is it to do with something geographical? Again, I'm not going to tell the answer to the viewers. I think it's important that they think for themselves.
mm,
Because if pollution was everywhere, asthma's everywhere, fine, causal. If cholesterol's everywhere but heart disease isn't, where's the causality?
Hmm.
And so we also see that, okay, well, let's look at a graph of pressure, of vessel pressure
Mm.
and distance from the heart. If we have, the closer you are to the heart, the much higher the pressure. Whereas when it goes very, very far, let's say to the end of our fingertips and toes, when it goes from the arterial system to the venous system, it's the lowest pressure.
Hmm.
And if we look at that graph, near versus far to the heart, there is a pattern. Where do we find the atherosclerotic disease there? It's always at the near side. Okay, well, maybe it's something to do with pressure rather than being in blood, because blood's everywhere, but it's only where the high pressure areas are.
Mm.
And again, you don't have to be a genius to follow along here.
Yeah.
And this is what's important. And so when you look at the pressure, you say, okay, well, let's look at all the high pressure areas and study those. And then when you look at the areas where things fork, so like a river comes up and then goes left or right, in a sort of Y shape,
Sure.
I think very simply.
Mm.
When you see that in an actual river, whenever you're walking by, you see that the stream before the forking is just flowing pretty much straight in a process called laminar flow.
Hmm.
Then when it hits that fork, there's some turbulence in certain areas because it's hit that junction and it has to reroute itself.
Bounce around a rock. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
and you call these eddy currents.
Hmm.
And what we find is these atherosclerotic plaques are always in these regions.
Mm.
So is it to do with cholesterol that's causal, or is it something else to do with this particular area? Is it something to do with the pressure causing damage to the vessels that then has downstream consequences of that?
Mm.
Considering the fact that you only find it in these areas geographically where there's high pressure and forking and not everywhere,
Hmm.
which is where the blood carrying cholesterol
Sure.
is it blood or is it something else? I personally think it's something else
Mhm.
because the clinical evidence matches that. However, I'm still open to evidence to the contrary. I'm always happy to change my mind.
I guess, well, the evidence we're running on is what, 20 or 30 years of red meat gives you high blood pressure. So I'd wonder if it was that or if it was something else involved with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you also follow these things for yourself. So what was the start of that for you? Why did you decide to go on the low carb,
Yeah.
high red meat diet, I assume?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say 90% of what I eat is red meat, fatty red meat if
Mhm.
possible. And that 10% is me just being a kid
Sure.
and
Yeah.
having,
Cake.
Coca-Cola now and again,
Right.
ice cream,
Mm.
cake, yeah, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm happy with that balance. I want to enjoy life and not just live purely for the sake of health, because I think there's an element of happiness as well.
Sure.
So for me, I do a lot of work in Italy,
Mhm.
and at the University of Milan, we have a department of biotechnology and pharmacology. And we basically just sort of figure out how cells work.
Mm.
How can we make this cell function its best and its worst, and how do we move it around in that spectrum?
Mhm.
Because if you know what makes a cell work at its best, you can take a group of cells, which is known as a tissue,
Mhm.
and then you can do it on a group of tissues known as an organ,
Right.
and then a group of organs, which is known as an organism or a human being.
Mm.
So we just start really small and work our way up. And when we were doing that, we were looking at how protein is produced. So one of the concepts we work in is actually in the cosmetic side or aesthetic side. We look at cells in the skin and what helps them produce all the protein they need, like buzzwords like collagen as an example. And we try to pull the levers of the cell to see what maximize that protein output. And some of the levers we work on is fuel selection. And that includes things like amino acids.
Mm.
So we've learned a lot about different combinations of amino acids giving completely different results. And so the ratio matters. But then we look at, okay, well, what about the amino acids? What if they come with carbs versus what if they come with fats? And that was when I had like a lightning strike moment. Because when we really tried to understand that, one thing I realized was protein with carbs is plants and protein with fat is meat. There's no other food source in the world that is having all three. But then I thought, well, why are we told to eat a balanced diet then? Because when we try and have all three, the cell function drops. But then when we don't have the competition between carbs and fats, the protein output was higher. I really did not understand that. And I just thought I'm missing something. I'm the idiot here. Something's wrong because
Yeah.
we're all told to eat a balanced diet.
Is it because of the whole food pyramid thing? I know they're talking about that in America right now with
No,
Mahan flipping the.
it's actually to do with the fact that the process required to break down carbs
Yeah.
versus the process required to break down glucose, fatty acids.
Right.
Those two processes, they have a sort of effect on each other.
Mhm.
Where if you go down one route, you kind of blockade parts of the other route
Mhm.
and vice versa.
Right.
So it's a bit like the way I describe it to my students is imagine you've got a road where you've got one lane going, or two lanes, both going in opposite direction,
Sure.
and there's roadworks on one particular lane. In order to allow one lane of traffic through, the other one has to stop,
Mm.
and vice versa. If they
Mhm.
both try and go through, the people end up on the pavement, they bump into each other, blah, blah, blah. And that's like the carbs and fats.
Mm.
You're not really going to be able to do both at the same time at maximal efficiency.
Mm.
And this ultimately is what's called the glycerol fatty acid cycle,
Sure.
sometimes called the glucose fatty acid cycle. In social media, it's popularized as the Randall cycle by Professor Bart Kay in New Zealand. And this is called the Randall cycle popularly because the paper that first talks about it was by Randall 1963. So Philip Randall, a British biochemist, published in 1963. And when we understand that, it kind of to me at least, it shows that we actually aren't meant to eat a balanced diet
Mm.
because the very fact that our chemistry blocks both from happening efficiently at the same time. So we're actually doing mostly one or most of the other. Like, how can we have a balanced diet when our own chemistry reflects all the food sources in the world?
Mm.
Because every food source is either a plant or an animal,
Mhm.
and our chemistry shows that perfectly. How could it be a balanced diet? And then I did a thought experiment one day, and I thought, okay, well that can't be right. Okay, well let's try and find an animal with a balanced diet. And then I thought, "Ok, there isn't one.
Mm.
Some people may say a bear because a bear eats berries and salmon,
Right.
but then it does that in order to get obese for winter,
Mhm.
so it can hibernate.
Mm.
It's not actually its diet. That's a metabolic state of hibernation that is temporarily required for its life cycle.
Mhm.
And so there isn't one. And it was when that penny dropped that I realized you've either got to be basically all meat or all plants.
Mhm.
So I guess you could call it carnivore and vegan, or 100% carnivore and 100% vegan
Yeah.
if you want to.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, okay, if that's the choice, I don't want to be vegan because even vegans will admit there are deficiencies and you've got to fight that with supplements and things.
Yeah.
But we couldn't have been vegan because millions of years ago we didn't have supplements.
Mm. Well, but then you've got the, I was a vegan. I was a
Yeah,
vegetarian for 10 years. I was vegan
I
for
tried
about
it for 2 weeks.
1 or 2, yeah, 1 or 2 years in the middle. And you've got the argument that you've got like whole swaths of India, for example, that are vegan. It doesn't seem like,
Yeah,
it seems like with the science that's coming out now around the vitamins and everything you get, and I can't even remember, and I'm carnivore and I talk about the benefits of it all the time, but there's just more and more videos that I'm seeing come out online from different doctors like
yeah,
yourself that talk about all the different vitamins and benefits that you get from eating meat,
yeah,
not just the amino acids. Because
absolutely.
I always bang on about the amino acids and how
Yeah,
it's so difficult as a vegetarian to get a well-rounded, because you go, oh, I eat beans, and it's like,
yeah,
okay, well, that I don't know if it's a full protein. I've heard that beans and rice is, at least I used to say that. I don't actually know if that's true,
yeah,
but you're missing out on all the other things and benefits, vitamin D, things that you get from red meat. So it
yeah,
doesn't really seem like, with the information that we have now,
yeah.
that veganism actually stacks up to something like carnivore.
I agree. And, veganism, if you take Brian Johnson as an
Yeah.
example, well known, and yesterday at the time of recording, it was shown that he's now got an autoimmune disease.
Oh,
And,
right.
and I pretty much said this about 3 years ago
Mm.
on camera.
Mm.
And when you see that veganism, it doesn't instigate or upregulate that competition between glucose and fatty
Mm.
acids, it chemically it makes sense.
Mm.
But then overall, holistically, when you realize that you're missing all these things, then it doesn't make sense to
Mm.
me.
Mm.
Again, I'm happy to be proven wrong. No problem
Sure.
seeing the evidence for that. But from what I've seen so far, I think it does lead to deficiencies. And
Mhm.
I know I've had vegan patients who they supplement with iron, they still get iron deficient
Mhm.
because there's elemental iron and heme iron.
Mm.
You can only get heme iron from animal sources.
Mm.
Vitamin B12 deficiencies are quite common on veganism.
Mhm.
It's very difficult to get it properly in a
Mm.
vegan
Mm.
diet. And we know that vitamin B12 deficiency is highly associated with a shrinkage of brain volume and brain size.
Mm.
I'm probably saying the name wrong, but I think it's Fotioglu 2008, the study at University of Oxford.
Well enough.
Yeah. So all these things made me think, okay, I don't think that's the answer.
Mhm.
But if someone wants to show me it's the answer, I'll happily look.
Mm.
And so I thought, well, it can't be carnivore either, because how can you get everything from meat? That doesn't make any sense. And then I thought, well, we know that is a deficiency. Well, let me see what deficiencies we get on this. And the first one I remember looking at was vitamin C.
Mhm.
I thought, there's no vitamin C in meat. Like, you need fruit for that. And then I thought, oh, actually, there is. There is some. Oh, well, that's not enough. And then I thought, well, how do you calculate the vitamin C requirement? And then I realized it's actually a function of how much carbs you're eating.
Mm.
Because vitamin C and carbs are very similar if you look at the molecules.
Right.
And so if you have them together, the carbs, the glucose, always beats the vitamin C into entering the cell. So I thought, well, what if you don't have that then? And there's no competition.
So it would mean that you don't get the vitamin C because the glucose goes in first, and so the body doesn't digest it quickly enough? Or?
And so the vitamin C doesn't really get a chance to go in.
Right.
But then I thought, well, what if there is no competition
Mm.
and you don't have the carbs with it? Well, then all the vitamin C would go in, but is that enough?
Mm.
And then I thought, well, yeah, it must be, because the only reason we have recommended daily amounts is based on a balanced diet.
Mhm.
But what about the guidelines for carb-free? And there aren't any.
Mm.
And so I thought, well, let me just try myself. I'm happy to experiment myself, but not on a patient. So I did. 2.5 years later, I'm thriving, got no deficiencies. I feel absolutely fantastic. Then I realized what I was talking about was called carnivore after I started. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
And I don't want to tell anyone because I don't want to sound like a weirdo. But then I discovered the carnivore community, and lots of people are doing it. There are athletes that I know of who have gone from vegan to carnivore and performed even better. And I think there's a growing number of people showing real world clinical changes rather than just theories in a paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I might be wrong on this, but I read in a few different papers now that there's less and less veganism going on. As to what the reason is, I think is going to be highly individual. I suspect it's only a suspicion.
It's becoming more popular. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's going down because people are realizing that the problems that still occur on veganism, so it can't really be that healthy, and they're seeing more and more people go carnivore, and all these things are reversing. Now, that doesn't mean that people should listen to this and just go, well, I'm just going to eat meat now. You can cause serious problems if you just do that. There is a right way, and there are many, many wrong ways. Happy to talk about that if you want, but people who try carnivore and it doesn't work for them, they come to see people like me, they're also my colleagues, and practically in 2 minutes, when they say what they've done, I go, well, there's the issue. And then we replan how to change, and they have none of those issues anymore, and they absolutely love it, and they never go back.
So who would be a person with a particular disease or immune disorder that wouldn't be suitable for carnivore?
Good question. I think there are certain things which, in fact, a lot of things which just changing your diet alone isn't going to be a miracle cure.
Right.
And I don't want carnivore I don't want people to think I'm saying just going carnivore will cure everything, because it won't. There's also things like, getting enough sunshine, getting enough sleep, making sure you have muscle mass, even basic things like social connections and the people around you that you love, which you can't do an experiment on, but I wholeheartedly believe that plays a role in one's overall health, because we're social animals and we're engineered or evolved to be. So what I would say is, doing all those things, ticking all those boxes, including the diet, stands you in the best possible chance to treat anything you have. And if you do all that and there are still issues, then those issues clearly are going to be way more complex than these things, and you're still better off than had you not ticked those boxes. To give you an example of one particular condition which may not be helped in terms of getting rid of it completely, I'll point you to a colleague of mine on YouTube called Carnivore Muscle.
Right.
His name is Jonathan Griffiths. He sadly, when he was much, much younger, had a physical injury. I think he was playing, I might be wrong on this, so apologies, Jonathan, if you're watching, but I think he was playing rugby, and one of the teachers tackled him when they shouldn't have, because of the size difference, and they really seriously injured him.
Boris Johnson style.
Yes, yes. Yes.
He was the kid. Yeah.
Yeah, so when that happened, he's got a problem with his spine, and now he has something called CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome. I'm not an expert on it, don't claim to be either, but he is pretty much fully carnivore. And that's not gone away, but he's much better than without carnivore. So there's an example of something which may not be helped.
Yeah.
And we also have certain genetic things, because carnivore won't change your DNA at the end of the day. However, I believe that we are progressing very well in treating those things. So for example, when I was in school, this is how nerdy I was, when I was in school, I tried to ask my teacher about something called CCR5 delta 32 gene therapy.
Right.
Which is a bit of a mouthful. And even they were standing up and they sat down and said, I don't know what to do with you anymore.
How old were you at the time?
I think I was 16.
Right, okay. Not the questions I was asking at 16.
No.
How do I get beer?
But I read that paper like 5 times,
Mm,
and I was fascinated.
mm,
And I said to my teacher, "Look, I think within the next 10 years, we're going to be reversing HIV." Now, I was wrong on the 10 years, but I wasn't wrong on what would happen in that 10 years because
mm,
we're doing that now with
mm.
CRISPR gene therapy,
Sure.
which is extraordinary. And
Mm.
I think it's really, really
Yeah, I
fascinating.
saw the other day they shut off the what is it?
Down
The
syndrome.
gene. Yeah, Down syndrome.
Yeah, it's
Insane.
amazing. I
Yeah.
mean, carnivore is not going to reverse Down syndrome.
Mm,
So there are many, many things it's not going to cure, and it's
mm.
not designed to be a cure. It's designed to just make sure you're getting the proper nutrition.
Right.
And if your problem you have is caused by lack of proper nutrition, yeah, you're treating the root cause
Mm,
without jumping on the drug bandwagon, and you're going to do well.
mm,
And for everything else, potentially further research and development, et cetera, and progress in things like gene therapy could be another sort of arrow to our bow
mhm,
in the scientific community to the point where we can help even more people and treat the problem rather than giving them drugs to cover up the symptoms
mhm.
of the problem instead.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's an interesting. I really like that you talk about it, and it seems to be something people are talking about more. Is this idea that there's no one size fits all for
Absolutely.
basically anything, and sort
Yeah.
of what you were talking about there a little bit is the lion's diet. I think where people get into a horrible car accident or something, and they just eat basically steaks for months, and they heal
Yeah.
about 1,000 times quicker than anyone who doesn't do that. It's almost like they're Wolverine. Something that I'm really fascinated in, and I'd love to chat with you about
Yeah.
is vitamin D and sunshine,
Yeah.
sun cream.
Yeah.
It's a big thing in the UK. I think from what I've read, nobody in the UK gets enough sunlight or
In
vitamin
many
D.
countries.
Yeah,
Many countries.
yeah,
Even Dubai.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading a book now that's all about what is it? Something about sunlight. I can't remember. It's just come out, and apparently the UK in the 20th century was the only country that didn't have a naturist revolution.
Oh, right.
Right, so it was a really big thing in different countries where everyone
Okay.
was obsessed with sunlight, and it was like
Yeah.
we were sort of healthier back then. And then all this stuff came in about sun cream, and people say you should put on sun cream even when you're inside. Just put it on all the
Yeah,
time because
absolutely.
it's horrible
My
for you.
colleagues say it. Yeah.
Yeah, Brian Johnson, I think he's the perfect example because he seems to be the polar opposite of someone
Yeah.
like Paul Saladino, who's all about meat, all about sunshine, to the point where he's putting on tallow sun cream, which I've looked into a little bit, and I don't know how much evidence there is there that that's actually a good thing to do. But
Yeah.
generally, getting away from cheap sun creams that you can buy in the shop is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Is that a thing that you see with a lot of your patients or people that come to you? Is a lack of vitamin D, or do you recommend sunlight?
I mean, yeah, vitamin D deficiency, I think, is underdiagnosed in
Mm,
general. That's just an opinion. I have no evidence,
sure.
but it is my opinion nonetheless. What I can say that is not an opinion and is checked is
Mm,
that we have particular levels that we say, okay, well, you need this many units per day or something
right.
and to have this much blood level. That was based on a calculation error
Mm,
and a mathematics error.
mm,
I think the reference is Vugler's 2014. And when they went back and checked the calculations that they ran to come up with the recommended daily allowance
mm,
or guidelines, they realized it wasn't in the hundreds of units that you needed per day. It was closer to 9,000.
mm,
And so an error like that means that even if you've had a vitamin D blood test and it says, tick, you're all good, actually that could still be low. And you don't know because the reference range on that blood test report where it says this is what's low and this is what's high, that's based on those guidelines, which have been shown to be based on a mathematical error. So absolutely, I think it's
yeah.
very, very common.
So when they go back and they look at that, why? Because all you hear all the time is medical research. What is it? I can't remember which scientist said it. The famous quote of "Science moves forward one funeral at a time."
Yeah.
And it feels like all the medical knowledge we have now is outdated, but nonetheless, you've got your NHS guidelines. In your experience,
Yeah.
how much medical knowledge that is recommended today do you
Yeah.
find is actually accurate and to the point? If you could give me,
It's hard to answer that without sounding like a cynical so and so.
yeah, a tinfoil hat
Yeah.
wearing, yeah.
I think I'll say this. There's a lot of medicine which is influenced financially.
Hmm.
I think that goes without saying, and anyone would agree with that.
Yeah.
But also, I think most medical professionals do not know how to properly read a scientific paper.
Hmm.
And I really, really apologize if that makes me sound arrogant, but I count myself as one of those people. If you look at me when I just graduated,
Mm.
even the early part of my career, when we talked in this conversation about X causes Y and causality,
Mhm.
it sounds very easy to follow and understand, and it is, but something so basic is missed. For example, people say smoking causes cancer.
Mhm.
Every doctor says that.
Mm.
But where's the experiment where every variable in that person's life, except whether they smoke or not,
Mhm.
is controlled so that we can say there is direct relationship between the input and output of that experiment. Doesn't exist. And yet they still say it causes it. And when we see things like that, I think that's one of the biggest problems. Lack of an ability to interpret or to design properly scientific studies, the financial influence that we have. I mean, again, without wishing to sound cynical, but how many pharmaceutical companies have ever cured a disease?
Mhm.
Zero. They may have developed drugs which eradicate symptoms and problem, but have they treated it is a different thing entirely. And when we look at the fact that a lot of medicine is based on which drugs to give, rather than getting the patient into a position where they don't need drugs,
Mhm.
I think the majority of what we learn in medicine is not good enough. As to whether it's right or wrong, it's on an individual basis, I think, of what we're talking about. But I don't think it's good enough, shall we say. So, for example, if a patient comes to you and you've given them a drug, and now you do a blood test and the number goes from 2 to 3 or whatever it may be, you haven't treated them,
Mm.
because treating means you have addressed the root cause such that the problem no longer exists, such that no treatment is therefore required. So, therefore, the question is, what is the root cause of the problem the patient has presented with? The root cause of every single medical problem in existence is never drug deficiency.
Mm.
Therefore, giving drugs has not treated the root cause. It is merely masking symptoms to make things look better or feel better. But you cannot say you've treated anyone, you have covered up symptoms.
Mhm.
On that basis, I think the vast majority of modern medicine is not good enough. And we need to switch to a model where we are addressing root cause rather than covering up people's symptoms. And I'll give you a prime example of
Mm.
this, one which I hope many readers and listeners and viewers will relate to. If you look at diabetes, a very common problem, it is basically, for those that don't know, to be technical for a second, it is basically where the blood glucose level is much higher than the body would have it if left to its own devices, the homeostatic level, for long enough that the kidney now passes that glucose into the urine. Okay. Now, we give a drug very commonly for diabetes called metformin.
Mhm.
And a lot of people talk about it as a longevity drug, which is nonsense. I'll get into that if you wish. But you give the metformin, and what happens is it changes the way the cell thinks about or responds to its sort of energetic status, if
Mhm.
you like, or ATP status. And what it does as a result of that, it accepts more glucose, even if it decided before the drug that it was too full and it couldn't do it for dangerous reasons. However, the drug comes in and then it just pushes the glucose in anyway,
Mhm.
even though the cell said, if I have any more, it's going to be toxic. But it's pushing it anyway. Now it's going to be toxic.
Right.
But what do we do after that? We then don't look at the cell. We only look at the blood and say, oh, look, the blood glucose has gone down.
Mm.
But we haven't looked at the cell. Now, to be not wishing to be patronizing for a second, but if I was to say to any reasonable adult, is magic real? Clearly, they're going to say no. Okay, well, if I say, I'm going to make this pencil disappear and it looks like it's disappeared, it's not disappeared, it's just moved somewhere. So when a doctor says, oh, the blood glucose has gone, well, we've just said magic doesn't exist. So
Mm.
where's it gone?
Mm.
If you only looked at the blood, then clearly it looks like it's gone. But common sense tells you have to look at where it's gone. So it hasn't disappeared.
Yeah.
It's just moved somewhere else. And if the cell says we're too full, hence why it's left in the bloodstream now to be elevated and therefore diabetes
Mm. Mm.
diagnosis, you then push it in anyway. Why do you think the cell wouldn't accept it in the first place?
Mm.
Because it will be toxic.
Mm.
We're evolved over millions of years or billions of years so that every decision the body makes is perfect to keep us alive for as long as possible.
Mm.
If the cell has decided it can't accept it because of toxicity, what makes you think pushing in is a good idea? And yet that's why that drug has not treated the root cause. It has masked the blood level because that is what we define as treating the patient, even though it's not treating the patient, so that hospital can say, tick, we've treated someone and they get more money.
Mm.
However, if you stop putting the carbs in your mouth in the first place, it's never going to be higher than the level the body would make left to its own devices, the homeostatic level. That's treating the root cause because you're looking at where the carbs are coming from
Mhm.
rather than forcing them into the cell against the cell's wishes, to anthropomorphize for a second, and then showing a chart of the blood level and saying they're cured. I think those are two completely different philosophies
Mhm.
One is one I wholeheartely believe in, treating the root cause. The other I think is abhorrent and should be completely demonized. And I think more people should be aware of it. And think it should be completely disregarded from the medical system entirely.
I think that's a thing that you see a lot with SSRIs.
Yeah.
It's now completely
Everyone's on it.
discarded this idea serotonin is the thing that you're looking for. And you still hear, and I don't know the details about this, but you still
Yeah.
hear people who are incredibly depressed.
Yeah.
It will help them as opposed to nothing at all, which you hear with like GLP-1s and Ozempic now is people who are so obese, it will do them better to get on them than not. But then you hear about all these side effects and
Absolutely. And I've been vehemently against those drugs for many, many years publicly. And I've had people in sort of private doctors forums, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, things like that. And I've got friends in them, and they take screenshots and say, "Look, they've posted your video, and they're all lambasting you." And I see the comments. This guy's an idiot. What does a dentist know? Why is he scaremongering? He's out to sell his own thing. I don't sell drugs anyway. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm just like, years later, I was proven right in every single thing I've said. These drugs are not to be played with. They're extreme drugs with extreme consequences, and almost never should they be used, in my opinion.
Yeah, I read a study the other day. I think it was Peter Attia was talking about it on his podcast, and it was about this muscle loss problem that you get with Ozempic. And you talk about it, and you talk about Ozempic face and all these things. For people who don't know what we're talking about, there's quite a few side effects. I don't know if everyone who goes on it experiences it with GLP-1s, but you get sort of loss of like muscle in the face, and there's a problem with bone density that you lose, and people are having problems with their teeth, and some people I think are even going blind in one eye from these things, and that's a small amount of people.
Intestines removed as well.
Really?
Yeah,
I haven't heard of that.
So what's happening is these drugs, the way that because for the public that don't know, right, in order to prescribe drugs like this as, let's say, an aesthetic doctor or a GP or a dentist or anything like that, you basically go on a course, they teach you it, and then you come back.
Right.
Now, a course is typically a day or two, and some people might think, well, that's not going to, actually it is, because you spend half a decade understanding drugs. You just need to learn about this individual, which doesn't take long, and that's fine. However, I've seen these, and I know what's taught on them. And what's taught to the doctor, if the public don't know, is, okay, guys, the way this drug works is it slows the rate of gastric emptying. It slows the rate at which food moves through the stomach, so you feel full and you don't eat. Now, if you were running somewhere and I shot you in the back of the head, I'm not going to say I've slowed his rate of running. I'm going to say he's dead. That's basically the equivalent here. So what happens is, we have GLP-1 receptors in the intestinal smooth muscle in the body. And these receptors, that's what the drug interacts with, hence why they're called GLP-1 agonists. And agonist means something that sort of triggers the activity in that area, upregulates it. So it hits that receptor and the activity starts. Now, there's a sequence of things that happen inside with protein kinase A, cyclic adenylase, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, what the public need to know is there is something in your cells called ATP. It's like the currency. You have no money in life, you can't do anything. The cell has no ATP, it's dead. ATP is the lifeblood, if you like, and it has to spend that ATP for the cell to do anything, make a protein, detox, clean up, whatever. Now, the reason cyanide is so poisonous is because it has an effect on the ability to make ATP.
Right.
And so when it blocks that entirely, you're dead. Now, when you take these drugs and you hit these receptors, ATP drops. Other things that cause ATP drop is things like alcohol, and we clearly know that's bad and poisonous. Fructose, which can lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, arsenic, cadmium, mercury, lead, you name it. And yet that's how these drugs are working. And so when it happens and these cells basically are affected by that, now you understand why these smooth muscles cannot push the food through. And so therefore it stays in the stomach. And when it sits there, it rots because it's not meant to be in the stomach for that long. That's why you have these disgusting smelling burps. That's literally rotting food. If you left it in the bin outside on a hot summer's day, that's what you've got inside you.
Right.
And so when it sits there for too long, the body thinks something's wrong. That's why you feel nauseous and it makes you want to vomit and it can't pass through. And because it's sat there, you don't feel hungry because you haven't digested what was there previously. And because you can't digest properly, you are malnourished. And because you are malnourished, you go into that metabolic state of starvation. That's when the body breaks down its own tissue like bone density, muscle, etc., etc. The only time in human physiology when you lose weight from multiple sources like fat, muscle, and bone all together is if you are basically in a comic relief advert in a third world desert village and you've got nothing. The fact that these drugs are, we're seeing that in these drugs, clearly that's how it's working.
Mm,
It is replicating that metabolic state of starvation. That is not healthy.
mm,
You can lose weight, um, but losing muscle and bone is not what you want to do.
mm,
What you want to do is optimize your body composition. That's a completely different concept entirely. And so when these drugs cause all these problems to occur, and first time I said this, I think it was back in 2019 when I was teaching in Sheffield, and people thought, "What the hell are you on about?" Even last year, I had comments on my Instagram saying some guy was commenting saying, "Bone loss, ha 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 ha. Who taught you that or whatever?" Like now it's everywhere.
mm,
Like I've never been wrong. And these drugs, if you're putting yourself into a metabolic state of starvation, you're not treating the root cause.
mhm,
You're losing all these things which are very important for you, like bone mass and muscle mass, which is why your weight plateaus because your body will just die if it loses everything, clearly. So then eventually you have to come off and then you just put the weight back on again.
mhm.
And we've got evidence, I think Zhang 2025 or 2026, it showed that you just put the weight back on again.
And I imagine you keep whatever you've lost in terms of bone density. I imagine that's quite difficult to grow back,
Very
depending on
difficult. Yeah,
the age you're taking it. And
absolutely.
yeah,
Because now the bones are weaker. If you
mm,
put the same amount of weight on again
mhm,
on a weaker foundation,
mm,
does that mean you're at higher risk of fractures and things? I personally believe it's a
mm,
possibility, but this is why it's not worth it. I've had patients lose over 100 kilos of weight,
mm,
but it's not been through drugs. It's been through proper nutrition.
mhm,
And they gain muscle by the end and lose fat from where it's not meant to be, like around the organs.
mm,
And they're not nauseous and they're not weak and they feel fantastic.
yeah,
There's a big difference between that and starving yourself to feel awful and going through all these problems and side effects. So when people say, oh, you take these drugs, it lowers your chance of heart disease or cancer or whatever, I don't disagree with that.
mm,
But so does starvation
mhm,
because you're not putting the carbs in your system to have all these problems anyway.
mm,
So why not just do that instead of a pharmaceutical intervention? So for me, it just doesn't make sense.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay. How much do you recommend supplementation? Because we're in this sort of era of supplementation.
Yeah,
Holland and Barrett is bigger than it's ever been before. You've got iHerb in the UK.
yeah,
I don't even know in America, but I know it's massive in America. You've got
yeah.
everyone taking 1,000 different pills to get all
Oh
their
yeah.
vitamins. One of the things I really like that you talk about, and I don't actually hear it talked about enough, is that people don't understand the difference between, for example, I think you, in one of your videos, you gave the example of eggs and
Yeah,
cholesterol, right? You don't, because you're absorbing cholesterol, you don't necessarily get that. And I know that's
yeah,
different, but people talk about vitamin D supplementation and
yeah.
you don't actually get whatever is in the pill. So it's
Exactly.
more important to get that from an actual food source. People talk about it
Absolutely.
with protein as well, where like if you take, when I was a vegetarian, I got to the point where, because now protein levels are different, right? Protein recommendation levels.
Yeah.
And so
They're
they were
always
talking
changing.
about that it used to be like half of your body weight in
Yeah.
pounds, essentially. And now it's exactly your body weight in pounds is recommended, I guess, a little bit
Yeah.
more or less, depending on how much you exercise. But you don't actually get, if you're taking scoops of whey. I was taking 8 scoops of whey a day at one
Wow.
point as a vegetarian. And then all
Wow.
that stuff came out. It was like a year ago that even the highest, like the best, most expensive protein
Yeah.
powders have found to, they've got like heavy metals in them, things like
Yeah.
that. And I was
And
like,
the
I
stress
can't
on your
be.
kidneys as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. And so that was something I stopped. But generally, I think it's interesting to sort of take things from actual food as opposed to supplements if you can.
Yeah.
Do you recommend supplements? Are there certain ones that you would get more from as opposed to
Yeah.
vitamin D? What I think there's some studies where people they don't get anything from
No,
vitamin D
absolutely.
gels. I think they're called the soft gels.
Yeah. I think supplementation is individual
Of
based. So,
course.
for
Yeah.
example, if someone, for some reason at that particular moment,
Mm,
is unable to absorb certain things in
mm,
a certain way, I see no problem whatsoever with giving a supplement for that situation whilst addressing their situation
mhm,
so that they don't need supplements anymore.
mm,
That's the way I see it. And it's important that people watching this understand there's a difference between a supplement and a nutraceutical. A supplement is to replace something that is not present in your diet. A nutraceutical is something that improves the way in which your body works.
mhm,
So, supplementation, by definition, you should not need any
mhm.
unless you are in a specific situation.
Right.
And so, nutraceuticals, no problem with those. You ticked all the boxes, you've got everything your body needs. This gives you a bit of a biohack to make it work a little bit better in some way. That's fine. But in terms of supplementation, I'll give you an example of where we might look at them. Typically, in my practice, we'll use them to diagnose.
Mhm.
So, for example, I had a patient recently who I suspected may have an iron deficiency based
Okay.
on their symptoms.
Mm,
And we stopped the peptide they were taking, GHK copper. and I gave them an iron referral for an iron infusion.
Mhm.
They did that while stopping that GHK copper peptide.
Right.
Almost immediately, they felt fantastic,
Mm.
and all their problems went away. And I said, okay, I think we found the root cause. I'm not saying you now have to have iron infusions all the time. I'm saying you've got to listen to what I'm saying about this GHK copper peptide
Mm.
you're on, and you've got to make sure your diet has good iron sources. That's the way to treat it. And that alerted us to the possibility that that was the issue. And that's how I like to use it.
Mhm.
But to then, if I was to say to the patient, right now, carry on with your peptide that you like,
Sure.
but just keep on having these every few months. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Mm.
Like, because if you find the root cause of a problem, it's typically causing multiple problems, and that's just one. So you take that root out and you give the body back what it needs. That I think is appropriate. Another example would be, I travel a lot. I will sometimes be in the other side of the world, inside the same hotel for like all week
Mm.
teaching, and I barely go outside unless it's the night and we're in a dinner part of the day.
Sure.
And so I'm going to not get any sun. In that situation, I may take some vitamin D with vitamin K2.
Mm.
And then when I'm come back and I'm not in a hotel, cooped up all day, I'll just sit outside
Mhm.
and do my work or something like that. So temporarily, I got no problem with it. Diagnostically, I got no problem with it.
Mm.
But it's something to commercialize for the end user to make them think they need this, I think is atrocious.
Mm.
And you don't need supplements. What you need is a diet that is wholesome and fulfilling and gives you no deficiencies.
Mhm.
That I think is the best way to go.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, it is the thing. Just exercise, sleep well, don't drink too much
Yeah.
caffeine. What do you think about microplastics? Do you see a lot of has there been an evolving problem that you've seen? And
Yeah.
sort of I guess the evolution of what we were just talking about
Yeah.
is from what I've learned, a lot of what you need to worry about when you're taking supplements is sometimes the microplastic
The
casing
coating and yeah,
around it.
absolutely.
Have you seen more problems with microplastics with your clients or
With my particular patients, not a huge amount
no?
because my particular patients, typically they have been following me for some time
Mm.
and they've actually implemented a lot of my advice before they come and see me.
Hmm.
They come and see me when there's that final bit they can't quite figure out.
Mm.
So typically it's not something I personally have to try and work with or work out. But I'm sure if I was to do an MRI on all of my patients, we would find them, even in myself
Hmm.
anyway, because we live in a world where you just can't escape plastic.
Hmm.
It's such a useful material, right? I think part of the reason we're seeing it more often now is because we have the technology now when we may not have had in the 50s, 60s, 70s, etc.,
Right.
to look inside a body and figure out how much plastics there actually are in the brain, in the scrotum, wherever.
Mm.
And so we are noticing it more.
Mm.
And I think it is clearly an issue because our bodies are not evolved to work with bits of plastic clogging them up
Mm.
like a spanner in the
Mm.
works. But then how do we get rid of it? I don't know the answer to that. I know a lot of people like to rely on the sauna.
Mhm.
I don't see anything wrong with it as long as you do it safely. But other than that, I really don't know what the answer is. I think it is a problem. I agree. And I
Mm.
think the best you can do is to minimize your exposure. So, for example, if you're having a ready meal, don't leave it in the plastic tray and put it in the microwave.
Mm.
That some of that will probably go in the food and you'll eat it. If you're wearing clothes that are heavy in polyester, this is a tricky one. I have read some literature that it can make its way through the skin, but I've also read literature which says it can't.
Mhm.
So I don't know, but I think it's better to be safe than sorry until the literature is hard and fast either
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So there are all these things that we can do. Drinking out of ceramic or glass
Mm.
rather than plastic. All these things can make a difference, and I think that's the best we can do so far
Mm.
until we have a way to actually efficiently remove them from the body.
Yeah. It's such a difficult thing with the polyester clothes, and what I'm finding now, because I've basically become obsessed with merino wool recently,
Okay.
because it's just amazing. You can use it for everything.
Yeah.
If you get the right brands, you can get ones with slightly less polyester or just a
Yeah.
little bit, underwear like the spandex, right?
Yeah.
But the problem I'm finding is it's impossible to find clothes that you can get a couple like organic clothing, but synthetic dyes
Yeah.
seems to be a big problem, and the leaching into the skin.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like, from what I've found, there's much evidence or study to that yet. Seems like we're still finding that. Have
Yeah,
you
I
looked into
agree. I
that?
mean, it's something which I have tried to look into in the past, but
Mm.
the problem I have with that is the lack of control.
Yeah.
To do experiments on that is very, very difficult. So I don't know the answer to that.
Mm.
But I wouldn't be surprised if there is some element of harm.
Mhm.
As to how much that is, I think that remains to be seen
Mm.
personally.
Mm. Okay,
Mm.
I want to take it back to something you were talking about before. You were talking about the fact that doctors don't know how to read studies. And
Yeah.
I, as a non-doctor, will read studies, and it's only when someone like Peter Attia or Brian Johnson or Paul Saladino pulls something up that I didn't think about because I'm not trained in that. I don't know how it
Yeah.
works. And that seems to be a problem with doctors across the spectrum, that they'll read it and they go, oh my God, sunlight can cure all of your diseases. And they go,
Yeah.
well, no, wait, we need to look at these other things. And they missed out these other things.
Yeah.
And there's observational studies, and it seems to be a big problem.
Yeah. And I
Do
think it's a problem that starts at university.
Yeah.
Because it's really not taught.
Mm.
When we say risk, when we say cause, these are really, really well-defined technical terms.
Mm.
You can't go around saying that your risk of this goes up if you do that,
Mm.
because that requires a fully controlled experiment. You can't say that. You can say your association with this may go up, which is entirely different.
Yeah.
And you can't say, well, this causes that, unless you've done an experiment where everything is controlled,
Mhm.
which is impossible when it
Mm.
comes to nutrition. So again, all you can say is, well, there may be an association with this.
Mm.
And you've got to use those words carefully. And most doctors don't.
Mhm.
I'm sure. And by the way, I put myself in that category.
Sure.
I'm sure occasionally I've missed sort of spelt certain things or missaid certain phrases.
Mm.
But on the whole, I try to be very careful with my word choice, like in this interview as well. So it starts at university. And even when you get to people who are very, very widely followed on social media, like the ones that you've mentioned, Peter Attia,
Mhm.
with all due respect, I think he has zero ability to read scientific papers. This is a guy that takes a statin when he doesn't have to, self-admittedly.
All right, I didn't know that.
And the evidence on statins is atrocious.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Absolutely atrocious. And it's becoming more and more common. Even doctors now
Mm.
are saying, I'm not sure I should be prescribing this. And then they say, well, if I don't, am I going to lose my job?
Mhm.
Whereas when they first came out, it goes, oh, you got to have a statin. But the fact that even doctors now are questioning it when they're seeing people like Jen Unwin, who has cholesterol like 800 in American units, which is way above the statin limit, for 8 years or however long it was. And then she has a scan of the heart showing zero disease. I mean, how can you say statins are required at that point? And when we see the whole cholesterol thing being knocked down now, I mean, Jesus Christ, even less evidence for statins. So the fact that he's taking one, I don't think he knows how to read a scientific paper either. And so this is the problem. Even people that you follow on social media, including me, we are not experts in scientific studies. There's so much more I have to learn. And I'm going to say one particular name who I think does know, without a doubt, how to read these things, and that's Professor Bart Kay
Right.
in New Zealand.
Okay.
A lot of people may see him as a controversial figure,
Yeah.
because when he debates people, he likes to play this character, which is very out there and brash and shouty, just for the entertainment value of YouTube, which I
Sure.
get. However, if you look beyond that and look at what he's actually saying, I mean, I doubt the guy's ever been wrong in his life. And when he breaks down a scientific paper, he is so on the ball. And he's one person to absolutely pay attention to. And he will show what Peter Attia has missed. He will show what Brian Johnson has missed. He will show what Rhonda Patrick has missed, again and again and again. And none of these people will debate him. And I think it's because they know they can't win, because he's right. So yeah, it is a widespread problem. And I think if a doctor is willing to go up in a debate against someone like Professor K and defend themselves, I take my hat off to them. But they won't be able to. And yet these are the people who are handing out these prescription sheets. And even bigger problem than that, I'm sorry to say, is not just the fact that they don't know how to read the papers, but regardless of whether they know how to read them or not, if they don't do what the guidelines say, they lose their job. And so the bigger problem is not just the education at university of teaching them how to read a paper, but the system in place which punishes people for not following guidelines, and then setting the guidelines from people who also don't know how to read papers and who are influenced financially as well. That system is the biggest. I think if I could change one thing about medicine, it would be that system. You get rid of that, and ultimately billions will be much better off, I think.
Well, you do hear about it in America that a lot of the standards and guidelines are set by the pharmaceutical companies. And so
Yeah.
the doctors that stray outside of that get in trouble, lose their license. I don't know if that's a problem here. You sort of touched on it a little bit. If we've
They
got a
can
big,
do.
yeah,
They can do. I mean, you look at Asim Malhotra,
okay,
the guy who
yeah,
whistleblowed
yeah,
on statins.
COVID as well, yeah,
Yeah, and I'm very privileged to know him, and his life was turned upside down because he refused to do what he was told. And yet 6 years later, people look at him thinking, actually, I think you might have been right. You look at Professor Tim Noakes, who wrote a very famous book I think in 1976, I think it was, called The Law of Running.
Mm.
It's basically where carb loading comes from.
Mhm.
And he tried it himself and just got diabetes.
Mm.
And when he came out the opposite and said, actually, fat is what fuels athletes better than carbs,
Right.
like he was destroyed, reputationally.
Mm.
And the universities went after him, and he had a horrid time.
Mm.
And yet we look back and think, actually, yeah, Tim, you're right. And it happens again and again. And people laughed at Galileo
Mm.
for saying that, actually we orbit the sun, not the other way around.
Mm.
People laughed at Ignaz Semmelweis, who's a Hungarian
Yeah.
physician
Yeah.
that said that you got to wash your hands between delivering kids.
There was a great play about him with Mark Rylance. I went and
Oh, was
saw
there?
it. Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, about
In London?
yeah, because what was it? They would do operations on cadavers or something. They're dead
Yeah,
bodies,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
they would go straight to delivering babies, and they wouldn't
Exactly
wash their
that.
hands.
Yeah.
And he sort of invented, I guess, one of the original soaps, because I was
Yeah.
actually looking it up the other day, and soap has existed in many forms for a long
Yeah.
time, but sort of general sanitation, particularly in hospitals, and then that completely revolutionized
I
sanitation.
think he's probably one of the most important things Hungary has ever given to the world, apart from Ferenc Puskás as well. And
I've heard that name, but who's that again?
he's a very famous footballer from the 1950s.
Oh, right. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think when you look at these mavericks, if you like, for want of a better word, we are so much better off because of them. Doctors who are doing things outside the norm, yes, fine. There are people who are going too far and doing things in a bad way. We've all, I'm sure there's news stories about that. But we have to allow doctors some level of freedom, possibly with some kind of accountability. Fine, they should at least say what they're doing in a way that's visible, as so we don't get people like Harold Shipman coming around again.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with going outside the guidelines, but being open with the patient about it, being open with anyone that wants to have a look, documenting it fully, showing your reason why, and then making a strong case as to the mechanistic sort of causality between all the different steps that you're doing in a very open and transparent way. That is not really going to be harmful to the patient. That's absolutely fine, I think. And I don't think people should be punished. I remember one time, one of the things that really forked my life is when I was a dentist. I retired a long time ago, but when I was a dentist, I had two patients whose gum disease cured. And when I was doing the gum disease treatments and referring them to specialists, it didn't cure. Like it was getting worse. Came back 6 months later and it was gone. And it was a diet. And I remember sitting there, I can tell you exactly where I was as well. I was sitting there thinking, do I say carry on eating that way? Or do I advise them to eat a balanced diet? Will I get in trouble for one or the other? Will I get in trouble for doing nothing?
Yeah. What diet was it? Was it
It was basically carnivore.
Okay, right. Yeah.
And I just sat there, and that moment is one of the moments I'll never forget for the rest of my life. Here were patients who had gotten rid of their problems by treating root cause. And I was scared scared for my job and my livelihood and my license, that if I told them to carry on, will I get in trouble? But then if I tell them to do what I was taught to say at university, will I bring them their disease back? And I just thought, how can I be put in a position like this? And that's why I think the system is the problem. The guideline system is the problem.
So then for the average listener, non-doctor who's listening to this conversation, what is the best thing to do? Because I don't think, as nice as it is to read medical studies and journals, I still don't understand everything from what you say. Doctors don't understand everything. What is one to do if they want to better themselves, if they want to get slimmer, if they want to go to the gym, if they want to move their body better and, not have back pain all the time?
Education is the answer. However, the problem is, where do you get the education? Who do you get it from? Because everyone, like I said, some people know how to read the papers, some people don't. The truth is, you'll never have the knowledge of someone who has spent their whole life studying it.
Sure.
And so what you have to do is look at the education, look at the facts in a way that is objective and not subjective. So for example, people that want to get slim, okay, let's take the calories in, calories out model. You simply start by questioning everything. Okay, well, what is a calorie? You just ask that question. And you say, well, it's a unit of heat to raise water temperature.
Yeah, that blew me away. That your video on the calorimeter.
Yeah, bomb calorimeter.
Yeah, people don't know. You burn food in water, and the amount of temperature it raises is what a calorie is, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Nothing to do with what your body actually needs.
Yeah.
And so when you look at, let's take that video I made as an example. If you want to lose weight, then you take the conventional thinking, which is eat less, move more, and you look at the calories and everything, and you just understand it in a very factual way, like I showed in that video.
Mm.
And then once you understand as much as possible and you look at the alternatives, unfortunately, it's a case of just testing it out.
Mm.
And the problem with that as well is, well, if you do the calorie model and you eat less and you lose weight, you'll believe in the calorie model.
Mm.
But it's not because the calorie model has any merit, it's because you just ate less.
Yeah.
And these are confounding variables. And so, unfortunately, this is a very depressing answer to your question. Unfortunately, there is no way.
Mm.
You're never going to know
Mm.
unless you spend your life dedicated to it. And so, it's pot luck as to whether the person you're watching and listening to knows what they're talking about or not.
Mm.
Is it someone like Peter Attia who thinks they should take a statin for fun? Or is it someone like Barker who will defend himself against literally any clinician in the entire world and come out on top?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you've got to look at.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the people who do well on social media aren't the people that necessarily know the most.
Mm.
You know, sometimes it's the people who are so good at what they do, they don't have time for social media because they're so good at what they do. Or they're so good at what they do that they're not very good with people.
Mm-hmm.
So they come across awful on camera, but so you won't watch them.
Yeah.
And so the problem is partly, this is going to be, I don't know what the word is, it's going to be a little bit anger inducing probably for the viewers, but I think we're the problem because we pay more attention to something when it's entertaining rather than when it's good for us. If something is good for us but boring and it requires 3 hours of effort, we'll watch the short or the reel, which is 30 seconds with nice music. So we're the problem.
Summary TikTok culture is a big problem
Exactly.
everywhere. I want to take it back a little bit. I'm curious what you think about the calorie model in general, because there was that book that came out. I can't remember who wrote it. It was called Burn.
No, I've not. Is that recent?
It was a few years ago.
Okay.
And it was a guy who studied, it was sort of a tribe, a native tribe. I want to say it was in Tanzania.
Okay.
And he noticed that the people who were living in this tribe, living out in nature, running around all day, burnt the same amount of calories. And I don't know where the other study was, but it was a Western style office.
Right.
And people naturally burnt the same amount of calories sitting at an office desk as the people who were running around all day playing in the sun.
Yeah.
And so his theory was that the calorie model is entirely wrong and that calories aren't relevant whatsoever.
I agree.
I don't know if that's, you do agree?
100% agree, because a calorie is just a measure of heat.
Yeah.
And if heat was what we needed to optimize metabolic process, we would be heliotropic like lizards that sit on a hot stone every morning in the sun. And yet we don't. If you look at calories, let's say you have 100 calories of an apple or something like that, right? Let's say, versus 100 calories of some steak. Now, the calorie model or calorie theory says that they're basically worth the same. But actually, if you had the 100 calories of apple or 1,000 or whatever number you want, your blood glucose level is now going to go up. Insulin will come in. And if your glycogen stores are full, it will convert or transmute that glucose into fat, and you can become fat. And if it stays up, you'll develop diabetes, blah, blah, blah. Also, I've missed a lot of things there, but you get the picture. Whereas if you have 100 calories, quote unquote, of steak, none of that happens. And you get building blocks of amino acids to make the proteins. You get the fatty acids to build things like your brain structure. And your blood glucose level is completely the same. Insulin is not rising and is not making you fat, et cetera, it's not tending you towards diabetes. Completely different outcomes, opposite outcomes, in fact, when it comes to diabetes at least. And yet the calorie model makes them look the same, which is atrocious. As well as that, how do you measure the calorie? There is a plus or minus amount. I don't know what the number is.
That's right. I think you said it was about 20% they can be inaccurate.
Exactly.
On the calorie amount on the packaging of whatever.
And I think, I might be wrong on this, but I think it's slightly different in different countries based on regulations. But 20 to 30%, let's say 20% to give some leeway to them, that means, okay, well, is it 100 calories of an apple you're eating, or is it 80 or 120? Doesn't sound like a lot. But when you're talking about 2,000 for the day, that's a massive difference. Massive difference. So it could be 1,600 or 2,400 as a result. I mean, that's huge when you look at the amount of food that would be. And so nothing really stacks up in that. And when it comes to producing ATP, which is the currency of the cell to do the work that it is designed to do or evolved to do, breaking apart a piece of glucose or a sort of subunit of glucose or a single fatty acid, molecule by molecule to make ATP, is oxidation. And the amount of water temperature increase when you burn a food has no correlation to the ability to produce ATP.
Yeah, we're not a steam engine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you look at glucose, one individual unit of glucose can probably produce, depending on the efficiency, up to probably around the mid 30s in terms of ATP molecules.
Mm.
Whereas if you take a fatty acid like palmitic acid with 16 carbon atoms, that might be in the region of between 100 and 150, depending on who you read.
Mm.
That's multiple times more. And yet we don't have the glycation damage. We don't have the loss of protein function because of glucose attaching onto proteins. We don't have the tendency towards diabetes because there's no insulin rise to combat the glucose rise in the bloodstream. We don't have the glucose going into the kidneys if that stays there chronically, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's much more efficient to use fat. Even less steps are required than glucose. So for me, it doesn't stack up that glucose is the optimal fuel for anything, really.
Yeah, I hear a lot online, and I'm not certain what I think about this, but people talk about sugar. And obviously, an orange is better for you than a piece of cake. But then there's a lot of people who say you shouldn't go near it at all.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, because an orange, or any kind of natural sugar source has glucose and fructose. Fructose is about 10 times more glycating than glucose.
Right.
And if people want to know why, it's to do with the sort of energetic position of the carbonyl group in there. But anyway, when you have that glycation damage, and glycation is basically where something latches onto a protein, so basically permanently, and that protein now can't do its job. Glucose has a certain amount of it. Fructose has 10 times that amount. And if you continually have that fructose, because it's so dangerous, the body gives up the thing it wants most to stay alive, just to tame it, which is ATP. And so what happens is when you take fructose in, like in fruit or in a cake, your liver ATP concentration goes down because it has to take some of that ATP, break it off, patch it onto the fructose so that it's kind of attenuated, a bit like in handcuffs, if you like.
Right.
So it's less glycating because it's that bad. It's giving up the thing. It keeps it alive. And so that's why when people have a lot of fruits and think they're healthy, they do a blood test and the liver function doesn't come back very well. And that's why people who are fruitarian, and there are many documented examples of this, where they have just fruit.
Remember Steve Jobs was famously for a while. I did it for a little bit. I did it on a cruise ship for like a week and I felt horrible.
Yeah. I mean, look at the people, how skinny they are when they pass away. And the fact that so many, practically all of them, get non-alcoholic fatty liver disease because the liver ATP concentration is dropping, and so the liver starts to die. And that's why fruit is not healthy. I haven't had fruit in years. I haven't got a vitamin C deficiency or anything.
So where do you get it from then?
Meat.
Right.
So there is, roughly speaking, depending on which paper you read and the meat and what grass the cow ate or whatever, roughly speaking, maybe around 1 milligram of vitamin C per ounce of meat in there. Obviously, a slight variation, which is very low. I'll absolutely admit that's very low as an absolute amount. However, as a relative amount, i.e. relative to how much I need, it's absolutely enough because I'm not having the carbs with it.
Okay. I hear a lot of people talk about linoleic acid in chicken and pork. Right. So it's why people tend to steer towards beef. It's why I tend to steer towards beef. I'm curious what your thoughts are on linoleic acid. For people who don't know, is essentially it's the same or similar type of acid that is found in seed oils, and it's because of the food that we give the chicken and the pigs. You wouldn't get it if you had grass-fed or naturally fed, I suppose. But it seems to be a problem in people who start eating more meat because they have more chicken and more pig, and then they have this linoleic acid problem.
Yeah. So sometimes it's also known as ALA, alpha linoleic acid.
Yeah.
And for me, if you have pork or chicken versus a balanced diet with everything, you're still better off. And there's nothing wrong with that. And yes, there is going to be some level of linoleic acid, but because you're not getting all the anti-nutrients and all the garbage that you were eating before, A, you're still better off, and B, your body is healthy to fight whatever it has anyway. So you're still okay with that. So I still happily have pork. I love bacon. Bacon's like one of the best things in the world. I love sort of Spanish chorizo, all these things. I like chicken with the nice crispy skin on it. I think it's fantastic. And I've got no problem with that whatsoever. It's having things like that while still having a load of other crap at the same time. The overall picture doesn't look good. But if that's the only thing, I think you're absolutely fine.
So then what would you say, what percentage do you have of, for example, processed foods, cakes, sugar, things like that?
So I probably have about 2 cans of Coke or 2 episodes of Coca-Cola Classic a week. And once a month, typically, I'll have dessert. Now, when I say dessert, I mean it's a big dessert. I've got like 3 or 4 plates.
Go out to a big cake shop.
It is
banana
massive.
split.
Yeah. So I'll typically do it because I do a lot of travel for work in different countries. I'll
Mm.
typically time it with when I'm in a different country
Mm.
so I can try something local.
Sure.
So it might be like a few scoops of ice cream, slice of cake, a donut, whatever. Like I look like a pig.
Mm.
However, it's once a month
Mm.
and it's not going to cause me any problems. Even the
Mm.
next day, I feel absolutely fine.
Mm.
Nothing's wrong. I don't feel awful at all.
Mm.
And I can tolerate that. As well as that, with my meats that I typically have, more than happy to have seasoning on it, more than happy to have some ketchup,
Mm.
any kind of sauce that I fancy. Really not a problem. If I
Mm.
go to a restaurant and I order a steak and, it's got little bits of seasoning or little bits of veg on the side that fell onto it, I'm not going to sit there scraping every single thing away. I'll just do a big push.
Mhm.
And if I accidentally eat a little bit of a berry or something, I'm not going to cry about it.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Have you heard? I think it's Paul Saladino mainly talks about this. He sort of rails against vegetables,
Yeah,
right? Because apparently vegetables, they've got sort of plants, they've got protective things in
they
them,
all
I guess
do.
toxins or
Yeah.
things. And so he completely rails against things like the whole kale diet and things like that, because he says that they are actively almost poisoning us when we
Yeah,
eat them.
absolutely. I mean, they are anti-nutrients, they are
Mm.
toxins, whatever you want to call
Mm.
them, which are not sort of poisons in the sense that cyanide is basically an instantaneous kill,
Mm.
depending on dose. But over time, chronically, yes, they can cause an issue. And we are just a species that has grown over time to be able to tolerate them to a certain extent. So a koala bear in Australia, I believe it only eats a eucalyptus leaf.
Mhm.
But if it eats anything else, it becomes extremely sick.
Right.
Credit to Anthony Chaffee, he always uses that as an example. Now, when we eat plants, we absolutely have some of these anti-nutrients and toxins that come into us, but we are so highly evolved, we can just about get away with them in certain amounts.
Mm.
So to give you an example, kale is quite high in oxalates.
Mm.
So
Mm.
when you have oxalates in your body, let's say it's bound to calcium, you get calcium oxalate, then you can get kidney stones.
Mm.
You can get oxalate kidney stones. And, I was in Australia very recently, just last week, in fact. And Michaela, I don't know if she's listening, she's one of the doctors I was teaching there.
Mm.
And she said, Abs, I saw this video you made recently where you said all these green leafy vegetables and you listed off a few. If you have them all the time, you're going to get kidney stones.
Mm.
And I got a kidney stone. And this Michaela, I'm not, she's vegan. And I said, well, yeah, because of the oxalate. You're not really going to get that from eating animal foods. And so they all have examples of this. Oxalate is one, cyanogenic glycosides, lectins like gluten, etc. They all cause different problems.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest problems we have is gastric permeability. So the integrity of our digestive tract lets things through when it shouldn't. And so when things get through, we find that things like autoimmune disorders come up quite a lot. So when we eliminate all those things from a diet, in an elimination diet, suddenly it starts to disappear very well. And someone who does this very, very frequently and to a very high success rate is a clinician in Hungary called Sophia Clemens, Zsofia, and then Clemens, Clemens. So she reverses gastric permeability by removing all plants in as quick as a week.
Mm.
Like it's massive. And if
Mm.
people are listening to this, watching, and thinking, well, how do I know if I've got it? A very simple test you can do. Anyone can do it. It's called a PEG 400 test,
Mhm.
PEG 400.
Okay.
And credit to author Anita Tagore, who told me about this in her book, Why Vegans Have Small Brains and How Cows Reverse Climate Change. And essentially, it's a sieve. So if you were to take a filter,
Mm.
pour a load of things in there, and some things came through, but other things didn't,
Right.
you can guess how big the pores are in that filter.
Mm.
Same thing with your gut when you measure your urine. So a PEG 400 test shows you how permeable your gut is when it's not meant to be permeable.
Mm.
And if you do that, and then you follow a protocol like Sophia Clemens, and then retest like a week or two later, all the permeability is gone. So we can actually measure these things. And not only do we measure them, we also find at the same time the autoimmune disorder is gone.
Mm.
And anyone that doubts that, just go to a clinic, meet a real life patient, and I dare you to look them in the face and say, you are not real.
Mm.
So absolutely, there's a lot of toxins there and a lot of variety and a lot of different plants. But the categories they fall into are kind of finite
Mm.
and they tend to cause similar issues.
Mm. Mm. It's a perfect excuse not to eat your broccoli when you're a kid.
Yeah. I mean,
Try-
broccoli is sold as a superfood, but broccoli it has something in there called glucoraphanin.
Mhm.
And glucoraphanin is acted on by an enzyme called myrosinase. And when broccoli undergoes trauma, the enzyme acts on this molecule
Mm.
to then convert it into something called sulforaphane. And sulforaphane is found in hospitals in oncology departments to treat cancer because it's cytotoxic. So people say broccoli has anti-cancer properties. No, it has cytotoxic properties,
Mhm.
which not only are harmful to cancer cells, but non-cancerous cells as well.
Mhm.
And that's why it's used in cancer, because it's so toxic.
Right.
Why would you want it in your whole body?
Mm.
And so even a doctor wouldn't be able to say this because they don't read the paper properly. They don't understand these things. Going back to doctors can't read papers
Mm.
properly. So yeah, most of these superfoods, they're not superfoods. They may have a certain element in them or vitamin or mineral, but it comes to a whole host of other stuff as well,
Mm.
which negates that.
Mm.
And actually, for me, the superfood is beef with the fat on and lamb with the fat on.
Mm. Oh, lamb's great. Okay,
Yeah.
so it does seem like the way the world is going, it's more whole foods, unprocessed. Don't touch processed food at all.
Yeah.
Something I'm fascinated about, and I haven't heard anyone talk about it, but I get my beef
Yeah.
from a farm, right? I get it shipped to me in a big pack, and then I've just got loads of packs of beef.
Yeah.
And occasionally, when that runs out, I don't have the time, I'll run to the shop and grab it from there.
Yeah.
I feel like it's an entirely different food. The sort of the
Hmm.
mass-produced, you name the grocery store. I don't
Yeah.
know if there's a difference between what you're getting mass-produced beef as opposed to from a local farm. Maybe the feed is different. I don't know if you experience that. I feel better. Not
Yeah.
only does it taste better,
Yeah.
it feels like an entirely different
If you
food,
go
and I
to a
feel like I've
farm.
got energy
Yeah.
when I get it from the local farm instead
Yeah.
of the shop around the corner.
I think absolutely there is going to be a difference.
Right.
However, I don't think it's unhealthy to have meat from the supermarket.
Sure.
If that is the best you can do, you do the best you can do.
Mm.
And having meat from the supermarket is still better than eating all the crap from before.
Mm.
I think the problem nowadays is, again, not the way we describe the system in healthcare. I think there is a system, without wishing to sound conspiratorial, I apologize, but there is a system in farming whereby the farmers are not treated very well,
Mhm.
whereby the price is dictated to them by supermarkets, whereby there are so many rules and regulations. You almost have to be like a PhD in reading things just to understand what you can and can't do at times, where farmers are treated, so poorly in terms of their profit margin, but they're expected to provide so much in return,
Mm.
and they're never given the credit they deserve. And when they're put under these constraints, yeah, they do have to rely on grain instead of grass fed. Yeah, they are expected to produce a certain amount of yield, regardless of the quality. And so their priority is quantity, not quality,
Mm.
because they have a family to feed. And I think it's a very sad situation. I feel very strongly about this. I've spoken about it for many years. But that's why I think there's a difference between farms who are privileged enough to be able to work the way they want to work and farms who are under the thumb of the supermarkets.
Mm.
Now, hopefully, over time, with consumer choice, it will push all farms to be more sustainable, whereby we can use regenerative farming and actually sequester carbon into the ground,
Mhm.
and actually farms become carbon negative,
Mm.
which has happened. I mean, you look at a TV show like Clarkson's Farm,
Yeah. Great.
regenerative farming. They
Mm.
are helping the environment.
Mm.
Biodiversity has increased
Mm.
by shying away from just growing crops, etc., and raising animals. And that is why there's a difference between what you get in the supermarket and what's outside.
Mm.
And if consumers request and demand better quality, I think it will change. However, let's be honest, consumers themselves are in a situation now where they have less and less money to spend on things. And
Yeah.
so they want the cheaper stuff. And so I think that two-tier system is going to stay. Well, we get the more mass-produced stuff in the supermarket, which is still better than Cadbury's and Coca-Cola or whatever, he says, while having a Coca-Cola now and again. And then you get people who can afford the grass-fed, pasture-raised, pasture-finished, etc.,
Yeah.
which is fantastic if you can afford it, but you don't need to feel bad if you can only afford the supermarket stuff.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it seems the way the NHS is going in UK regulation, there's this obsession for people who are listening outside of the UK with reducing costs on the NHS. And
Yeah.
there was the recent smoking ban, which you can debate is good one way or another. Obviously, it's better if less people are smoking because you've got better cardiovascular health. But then you're talking about sort of reducing people's personal choice, which I think is a problem. Are there
Yeah.
any? How do you see the way the UK, British government has regulated new things? I know there was the whole thing about reducing meal deals with sugar content, but then
Yeah.
you sort of say that you're shifting to sugar alternatives, which is a problem, which
Yeah.
nobody seems to understand. House of Lords, a bunch of 70-year-old men don't really understand what they're talking about. Do you think
Can't
we're
read
going in the
scientific
right
papers.
direction? Yeah.
I think it's a tricky one. I think we're never really going in the right direction, because we are never really addressing the fact that our biochemistry is geared towards processing fats or carbs, and not really both at the same time
Mhm.
to maximum efficiency. Once we address that and we realize that a balanced diet doesn't exist in nature, no
Mhm.
animal does it,
Mhm.
and even a bear only uses it to get fat,
Mm.
which is what we don't want. Um, Only then will we start to make the correct decision. So I don't think at the time, for the time being now, or ever in the past, have we made sensible decisions when it comes to nutrition.
Mhm.
Even the whole, Jamie Oliver did a wild thing a while ago for non-US listeners. The chef, he did a campaign a long time ago called Jamie Oliver's School Dinners or something like that to
Right.
improve the quality of school meals.
Mhm.
But it's still loaded with carbs.
Mm.
Yes, it may be more whole foods, etc. That's fine, but we still don't need carbs as human beings. Then we had a thing a couple of years ago. I don't know if you remember, but Marcus Rashford, the striker at Manchester United
Yeah.
at the time,
Mm.
he, I think it was around lockdown, probably
Mhm.
maybe 5, 6 years ago. He set out a campaign to improve school meals. I think it was in his region or nationally, generally, I
Mm.
can't
Mhm.
remember. Um, what does he know about nutrition?
Mm.
Even the sport that he's playing, he may think, well, I know about nutrition because I eat a particular diet and I'm performing at the top of my game. Fair enough, but you're following the advice that basically what came from Tim Noakes,
Mhm.
who himself has admitted you'd actually perform better without carbs.
Mhm.
So why are we letting people like that dictate nutrition into systems like that? And I think
Sure.
actually the best way would be to get rid of the ability to regulate that,
Mhm.
because then we would allow people to have whatever they want, and it'll become more obvious what the right answer is,
Mm.
and things would naturally shift towards the right way anyway.
Mm.
For example, anytime that's happened in history, you take the Thomas Edison versus
Tesla, was it?
Nikola Tesla, yeah,
Yeah.
and in America versus Europe, and
Mm.
AC versus DC, etc. There was no regulation from the
Mm.
government telling you which way because they're not qualified in that.
Mhm.
These are pioneers, and yet it sorted itself out.
Mm.
And what will probably happen now is, back then, AC was better. And we
Mhm.
have AC now in the UK and in parts of Europe. Now, with the way things are becoming more and more electric, probably DC is going to be better and
Mm.
things will regulate.
Mm.
And that happens everywhere we go. Even with language, such a complex thing as that, it regulates itself because of the free market.
Mm.
And if you get rid of the regulation, you allow schools to give people what they need, and you see schools giving the proper nutrition and the kids performing better and having better health, why wouldn't you copy that
Mm.
as a result? And I think it would come. But trying to regulate it constantly from people who know nothing about how to read the papers, I'm sorry, but that's a joke,
Mm. Mm.
frankly.
Mm. I want to go into conspiratorial territory here
Go for
because you
it.
touched on AC/DC. Have you read or seen anything about electrical currents, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth?
Okay, yeah.
Seems like it's becoming less crazy.
More people are talking about it.
Mm.
I personally don't believe it's an issue. I mean, I'm
Mm.
happily, I'll wear earphones and Bluetooth
Yeah,
headphones.
I
I,
do
I,
as
I
well.
I don't really care.
Mm.
What people need to understand is if you get rid of all electromagnetic radiation, you are literally dead,
Mm.
like on the spot dead.
Mm.
Like
Mm.
it's not that you're suffocating, you're instantly,
Mhm.
you're alive and then you're not alive the next leptosecond. Electromagnetic radiation is created by your own body.
Mhm.
In order for you to produce ATP, you need to move hydrogen ions either side of a membrane in the mitochondria. That movement of electrically charged particles generates an electromagnetic field necessarily
Mhm.
because you cannot separate electricity and magnetism from each other. That's why they have been unified, by works of people like Michael Faraday, for instance,
Yeah.
to become the electromagnetic theory. Now, when you look at radiation in general as a spectrum, you have sort of long wavelength and short wavelength.
Mhm.
The long wavelengths have basically less energy in the actual true sense of the word energy, and that will be things like microwaves, radio waves,
Mhm.
etc. Stuff that is in the background of the universe everywhere.
Yeah.
Even now, between me and you talking, there's all over between
Mm.
us, right?
Mm.
And then in the middle of the spectrum, we have more towards visible light, hence what our eyes, our retinas are designed to see
Mhm.
and recognize. And then just beyond that, we have UV, which maybe some animals can see, but others can't. Just below that, we have infrared. Again, we have infrared cameras. But if you go way over to the other side, you have things like X rays
Yeah.
and then gamma rays. Now, when you leave visible light and you go towards UV,
Mhm.
which is the immediate step up from that in terms of energy, we know that UV can cause oxidation of molecules in the skin and everywhere. That's why UV is something that we have to worry about in exposure. Then, if you go even higher and you go towards the X ray level, gamma radiation level, there's way more energy. And think of it this way. If the analogy that I use when I teach, and this is something I use, I've used it at Royal College of Physicians, Royal Society of Medicine, so even professionals understand with this. If you think of radiation as an egg,
Mhm.
right? If I throw gently this egg to you, very easy to catch, very low energy. Now, if I throw it to you supersonic speed, you can't catch it. It's going to splash everywhere
Mm.
and it's going to damage you. So the speed with which a particle of radiation hits an object determines whether it splats that object or not. If it goes at very low energy and just hits your skin, it's just going to shake a little bit
Mhm.
and absorb that movement, that kinetic energy, and you'll feel that as warmth. Warmth temperature is basically movement on an atomic scale. If it hits that same part of you, that same part of the atom, with so much energy that it can't absorb it, and actually that part of the atom goes flying out the other
Mm.
way,
Mm.
that atom is now missing a piece and it becomes a free radical. It's charged.
Yeah.
That's when you cause problems. That's when the atom becomes ionized
Mm.
because it's now an ion, a charged particle. So that's why you have ionizing radiation and non-ionizing. If you go towards the ionizing part of the spectrum, that radiation, when it hits you, can damage your atoms by knocking pieces of them out of the
Mhm.
way. And so you have all sorts of problems. And that's why we have protection in radiation units in whatever,
Sure.
in hospitals or dental practices or whatever. So anything below that, visible light, infrared, whatever, I got no problem with
Mm.
whatsoever.
Mm.
Bluetooth is not in the UV spectrum or X-ray spectrum.
Mhm.
It's well below that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a thing that you see with footballers now. I can't remember if it was Saladino who was talking about it. I think it was. He was talking about Real Madrid and they've all got wired headphones. And there was an American football arena that people were talking about. I want to say in San Francisco or San Diego recently, where they had their training stadium
Yeah.
and they had more injuries. And someone suspected it was because they were right next to a power station, and so the radiation from that. I don't know. Something people are talking about now more as well, which does seem to be legit, is receipts and the
The ink.
chemicals from printer paper. Right? You sort of, if you work in a grocery store and you're touching receipts all the time, there's people who are affected by that. There's people who are affected, like cleaners. It's now been studied they have more problems later on in life because they're around all these toxic chemicals that they're spraying on mirrors and windows and houses all the time. So I just wonder if it's that thing where, like, you go out in nature and you feel a lot better. Obviously, nature has loads of things that we still don't understand why you feel better.
Yeah.
Also, it's just nice to be in trees and touch grass. But
Yeah.
I sort of wonder if it's one of those things, like something I'm fascinated as well by that I've recently learned about and that I don't see talked about anywhere was you started in dentistry, you said?
Yeah, originally, yeah.
Yeah. So something that kind of blew me away when I learned about it was the Minamata Convention on Mercury.
Okay, yeah.
Which was the poisoning. For people who don't know, there was a factory, I sort of think of it like Simpsons style, that was poisoning the water
Yeah.
in Minamata, Japan, I want to say in the 90s. And there's actually a film with Johnny Depp where he plays a journalist that goes and explores this. And their cats were acting strange. And people were like, what's up with all of our cats? And then they all died. And then the people started acting strange. And they found out it's because they all had mercury poisoning. And so Minamata found this out and then had a big international convention that realized that mercury is actually quite bad for you, funnily enough, the most
believe
dangerous
it or not,
neurotoxin
yeah.
to man. So there's a big convention and agreement between all these countries. And something that blew me away when I found out is that the UK agreed to this. But I think, I imagine, I don't know, I imagine it's because they've got such high stores of mercury that they use for things like dental fillings, etc. They went, we agree to this is really bad for you, but we're going to use it for another 9 years and give you mercury fillings. And something that my partner, she's out today getting her second mercury filling removed because they degrade over a period of like 10 or 12 years.
They
So
can wear down.
Yeah.
Wear down.
So is that a problem that you've seen where people start to get some sort of mercury poisoning from the degradation of a filling, an amalgam?
I think what would be really interesting for viewers to hear first is what does a dentist actually get taught to say to patients at university?
Right.
I was taught to say to my patients, okay, if your patient is questioning mercury, you tell them, yes, it has been removed in Scandinavia for environmental reasons. However, it's perfectly safe when it's in an alloy with other metals like tin, silver, zinc, etc., to make amalgam as an amalgam filling. And there's no evidence to suggest it's harmful. And I blindly followed that because I knew no different and I wanted to keep my job and I wanted a good reference when I left university. Now I look back and I think, what a load of BS. The idea that it's reduced for environmental reasons in certain places, absolutely fine. And I have no problem with that whatsoever. To suggest that there's no evidence that it causes problems in fillings in the long term, that's because there never will be evidence either way, whether it's safe or harmful, because there's too many variables to control over a long-term study. Like, what are they eating? How do you know the problems in their mouth is because of the mercury, not because of the crap they're putting in their mouth? You have no idea unless you control
mercury from fish,
exactly,
for example,
or any other place in the environment. That's why there's no evidence, but you can't use that as a way to say it's safe. The honest answer is we don't know what the long-term effects are because we cannot do an experiment which controls for it. And that's very valid to say, and that's very safe to say, and that's true. However, I personally believe mercury has no place in the human body.
Mhm.
Um, as dentally speaking, it's a very useful material because when you're working at the back of the mouth where you can't keep it dry as easily,
Mm.
it's very hard to physically reach. It's very useful material because it's moisture tolerant. However, there are other moisture tolerant materials available. Yes, they're not as durable as mercury. We have glass ionomer cement as an example.
Mhm.
However, they're always improving, and I don't doubt that we will get them to a point where they can tolerate moisture and still become very rock solid in the future as well.
Mhm.
I personally, as a former dentist, would never have a silver filling in my mouth.
Mhm.
And anyone that has them in there, I don't mean that to say go and get them removed. I actually don't mean that at all. What I mean is, if you have them in your mouth, it's a toss up between is it worth removing? What price do I have to pay? I
Mhm.
don't mean financial, but biological
Yeah.
versus leaving them in. Because if it's quite a big filling, just taking it out could cause the tooth to break.
Yeah.
And now you got no tooth.
Mm.
You're actually far worse off if I had just kept the mercury there.
Mm. And there's cases of people being poisoned by unsafe removal processes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these things going on. I don't know about the removal process because again, the control is dependent on there.
Mm.
Because as you remove it, if you're sucking up the gas at the same time and
Mm.
none of it goes into the patient, you should be okay.
Sure.
And as you're isolating the tooth properly. Um, and also, even if it is inhaled by the patient, it's not going to be there for decades.
Mm.
It's probably, I
Mm.
don't know for certain, but probably transient.
Mm.
So I think if you do have them in your mouth, the best thing to do is to carry on going for your regular checkups, which you hopefully are doing, and just keep an eye on them.
Mhm.
If it gets to a point where something needs to be done, fine, do something and really weigh up the options of materials and avoid the mercury if you can.
Mm.
If it's absolutely fine and not causing any problems, but removing it would cause a problem, then you've got to have a frank discussion with your dentist. Is it really worth it?
Sure. Do you think we're at a place now? It seems everything everyone is talking about is microplastics. It seems to be everywhere in food. There seems to be some things you can do to mitigate that. And then there's pesticides, and there's
Yeah.
just so many problems. Do you tend to avoid fish? Because it seems like from where we are now, sadly, we've just poisoned the world to such a point where, again, you can occasionally have the fish or the cake, but really, if you have salmon on a daily basis, you're going to be causing yourself some problems.
I think it's a really good point. And I've seen some videos of where fish are farmed
Mm.
and it just looks awful.
Mm.
Like even the fish themselves look
Yeah, the
deformed.
salmon farming in
Like
Scotland
it's
is horrendous.
disgusting, isn't
Yeah.
it? And yeah, we absolutely have poisoned it,
Mm.
and we've only got ourselves to blame.
Mm.
I personally think it is so difficult to know whether what you're buying is actually wild caught out in the Atlantic versus in a farm.
Mhm.
And you got all these like stickers that say, "Oh, this fish was treated well" or whatever. What does that even mean?
Mm.
Like, does it mean it was on a farm, but it was fed nice stuff?
Yeah.
Which, because I still don't want it.
Well, this is what I find is like any label you see on food, just know to avoid that food. There's the blue tick, which I always
Yeah,
reference,
sure.
which is what was it? Seaspiracy, I think, talked about it, which is
Yeah.
we don't kill. That was particularly about not killing certain types of fish.
Yeah.
And you look at the documentary and you're like, they're just using trawlers.
Yeah.
Trawlers don't avoid dolphins, so they'll catch everything. They kill everything, including the coral reefs,
Yeah.
and then sort of throw back the dead dolphins. So there's no
What's the point?
label on anything that means anything. It's
What is
usually
the point?
created by the companies that do it.
Yeah.
So there's no safe amount of regulation. So anytime I see a leaf or any sort of like, this is safe label, I usually just tend to avoid it altogether.
My advice to people in that, and the way I buy my fish, if I do want some, I will look at places that sell fish near the coast.
Mhm.
I don't know, like Grimsby or Cornwall or something like
Sure.
that. And those places, like they will be an actual fishmonger, physical brick and
Yeah,
mortar store.
yeah.
And they will have a relationship with a local fisherman, or they've got their own internal fisherman. And they have gone out to catch them,
Mhm.
and they will then deliver that to you. That I think is the best way to get the fish, because you can actually go and see. Like I actually did it once when I ordered some. I went on Google Street View to see the fishmonger that I was ordering from,
Great.
and you know which area their boat comes in
Mm.
after they've caught the stuff. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's probably okay.
Mm.
And it tasted fantastic,
Mm.
and the color as well, the salmon, it's way more orange than a sort of light pink,
Yeah.
as well, and you can tell the difference. So when you want fish, I personally, that's what I found works pretty well. If anyone has any better way, please comment below somewhere. I'm
Yeah.
happy to have a look.
Yeah, fish. We sort of touched on meat quite a bit. I recently started cooking everything with butter. I was using olive oil for ages.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any truth to this, but there's people who take like a shot of olive oil in the morning. No, you don't do that.
No, I don't think there's any plant oil which I'll be willing to take.
Mm.
There is still 16% unsaturated fatty acid, roughly, depending
Yeah.
on which paper you read for olive oil. And if you were to do a PEG 400 test,
Mhm.
again, like to measure gastric permeability, once you are completely okay,
Mhm.
if you then have a plant oil and redo the test later, you'll find the permeability comes back.
Mm.
Even something like coconut oil,
Mhm.
which I think is like 98% saturated,
Mm.
which is a good stuff.
Mm.
If you have that and then you do the PEG 400, the permeability is back.
Mhm.
So I always suggest to people go with animal source.
Mhm.
First of all, go with things that are solid at room temperature,
Mhm.
like lard, tallow,
Depends on the
good
day,
butter.
because my butter melts
Yeah,
on a day
that's
like
true.
today.
Yeah,
It's
a
in the
bit of a
fridge right
heat
now.
wave
Yeah.
as we sit here in London.
Mm.
But at 21 degrees C, should we
Mm.
say, room
Mm.
temperature,
Sure.
it should be solid.
Mm.
So lard, tallow, butter, etc.
Mhm.
Anything that's a liquid at room temperature, I personally avoid
Mhm.
completely. And if it's butter, typically I don't have dairy.
Mhm.
Apart from that sort of one dessert of the month where
Sure.
I'll pig out.
Mm.
Typically, if I am going to cook in something, it will be you can buy jars of like beef fat.
Yeah. Talow's
Stuff like that.
expensive, but it's amazing. I was in
Yeah.
Japan last year, and you go around the shops and you get the most amazing fish and meat
Yeah.
there. But actually, what they do is they've got almost what looks like a mint when you
Yeah.
go to like a hotel and they've got it on your pillow, but it's actually just free, and it's a little tiny cylinder of tallow. And I was like, oh, mate, this is amazing, because I've been learning about the benefits of tallow.
Yeah.
I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about that tallow sun cream that everyone's doing. I can't seem to
Oh
find.
yeah.
Sun cream is getting better because I think more people are aware of it. And now there's like mineral sun cream, and there's apps like Yucca, which you can download for free. And then you can just scan stuff in the store and it gives you a really good rating. And then you can actually look into the details, which I think is amazing, and find out what's good, what's bad. Why did this get 90% as opposed to 3%? As I drink this CBD drink, I don't think that's a very good one, but I'm not going to say the brand. But yeah, it seems like most body products in the store ought to be avoided.
Yeah, I think sun cream is getting more and more talked about.
Yeah.
Absolutely. People are right, absolutely correct to question it,
Mhm.
because you should question everything.
Yeah.
And it is true that when sun cream came out in the 1980s, skin cancer rates went up.
Mhm.
However, to be very fair, you can't say that's because of sun cream.
Mm.
It could be because people know they had protection, so they stayed out longer.
Yeah.
It could be that the people who needed the sun cream were already at the highest risk. You've no idea. All we know is the statistics, which are what they are. We cannot attribute cause and effect in my personal view. But what I can say is this: I never wear sun cream.
Right.
I used to, and when I used to wear it, I burn. Now I don't wear it. I never burn. What I'm about to say is purely an opinion.
Sure.
And I have zero evidence for it whatsoever. But I believe there is a role to play in your ability to burn, because sun cream only stops the burn. And I think the burn is a lot to do with the level of unsaturated fatty acid intake in the diet. So a saturated fatty acid is where it is like a straight chain of fat and everything is in its correct place. And unsaturated has a kink in it because there's a sort of double bond somewhere where it's too big on one side and so it can't straighten out. So it's got a fold in it.
Right.
And when you do that, when you have that bond, that double bond, that can oxidize, where actually it latches onto something else. But oxidation is like the body's version of rust. So when this oxidizes, it can be slightly inflammatory. And so when the UV ray hits that double bond, it can oxidize that double bond. In saturated fatty acids, we don't have that. So when that UV hits that unsaturated double bond and it oxidizes, that's going to be inflammatory. And as a result, it can cause all sorts of things, nasty things to happen in the skin. Like I said, I have zero evidence. I am not claiming that to be the correct answer. That is purely a theory that I have. It is a theory I believe shared by a couple other people. However, it matches what I see clinically. When we take out the unsaturated fatty acids, when people go carnivore, a lot of my patients do, they stop wearing the sun cream and they don't burn anymore. They also don't sweat as much. It's very strange. So I believe that theory holds up based on what I see clinically, but I'm more than happy for someone to completely demolish it and show me the truth. Because I want to know as well. But I personally don't believe that sun cream is the be all and end all of slowing down visual symptoms of aging in the face. And certainly for myself, taking it out has led to only positive things. And that's my experience. No one can tell me any different because I know what I've experienced. And also it's the same for all my patients as well. So all I would say in sun cream is we don't know half as much as we think we know.
Do you find that to be the case with other body products. I tend to avoid. I make a lot of my own stuff. Make my
Yeah.
own deodorant, shampoo,
Yeah.
conditioner, etc. All natural, like bicarb as much as possible.
Yeah.
Um, we've sort of cut out a lot of soap. I was in a we had a play last week. We were doing a play in a theater around the corner, and I was washing my hands in the bathroom, and I was like,
Yeah.
how much soap is actually in this thing? How much Castile soap is in this? Because we just use purely Castile now.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's going to be like 10% soap, the rest. And there was 0% soap in this
Wow.
bar. It was just products to foam and
Yeah. To
gel
make
and
you think
mostly
it's clean.
scents. Yeah. And from what I can understand now, anything with a scent is to be generally avoided. If you can, get it out, perfume, bin it.
Yeah.
It's kind of terrifying.
Because it doesn't even tell you what the fragrance is.
Yeah.
Like if you look at a skin like a moisturizer and an ingredient says this fragrance. Well, okay, what is it though?
Yeah.
Like I don't know.
Yeah.
And you look at actual fragrances, like whatever designer brand you want. Where's the ingredient list? Like what's going on there? Since I went carnivore, one thing I found is I'm much more sensitive to different fragrances.
Yeah.
Stuff that I used to just put on and I was fine with. I'll put it on now and actually I got a sudden irritation in my throat. What is that?
Oh, I can't
I
walk
must be
past
this.
people in the shop anymore. Like
Yeah.
someone, a mate of mine, he had Lynx the other day and he put it on and it just permeated.
It
We
ju-
were in a
it-
theatre and it
yeah.
permeated the entire theatre. And, it's just so many men are just doing that, just spray and they think they're good and they think it's just on them. And I had to like physically leave this giant space that it just
Yeah.
sort of filled. It hurts me now.
I know what you're going through.
Mm.
Yeah, I feel the same thing.
Yeah.
I guess that is a downside of eating clean because you're more sensitive to
Mm.
stuff in the world. But it doesn't change me, and I still would do what I do.
Yeah, something that I started to read about the other day as well was so people are getting away from scents because they're starting to learn about this, and so they go to essential oils.
Yeah.
And you find essential oil in lots of things. You find it in things that you can consume, and then I recently learned that actually, no, consuming essential oils is really bad for you as well.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's this push to. I can't remember what it was. It was the sequel documentary to Super Size Me.
Okay.
And it was all about the chicken industry in America.
Ah, interesting.
And it was everything from it's a fantastic documentary for anyone who wants to watch it. It's all about it goes from chicken farming and how difficult it is to be a chicken farmer in America because you're constantly put under new regulations. So you've just bought loads of stuff, and there's like a hierarchy from month to month on who's like the best producer of chicken or who did it the best. And I don't really understand how it works. It's like employee of the month, but for chicken farms basically.
Yeah.
So it goes from that all the way to chicken restaurants and how bad they are for you. And, now it's a thing because of Maha in America that people are getting away from seed oils, but that's still a big problem. I completely
Again, it
forgot where I
comes
was
back
going
to
with
the
that.
oils, at room
Yeah.
temperature, the oils, right?
Yeah.
The same thing with what you're cooking with, same thing with what you're eating, et cetera, et cetera. So anything that is, liquid at room temperature, just think twice as a general rule. General, not a strict rule, but as a general rule.
I think I was going back to essential oils. I can't remember exactly where I was with that, but I was generally just asking the question, as well as sun cream.
Yeah.
Do you tend to, with your clients, get them to stay away from
the essential
body
oils.
products essential oils, body products with loads of stuff in them?
Yeah.
Do you recommend against that?
Pretty much. I mean, most of my patients, they end up pretty much on like just one skincare product,
Right.
if they need anything, and that's it.
Mm.
And if they can afford it, we compound that. So what that means is, let's say you go to a shop and you buy, just pick a random example, like 1% retinol. Fine. Yeah, 1% of that is retinol. But then the rest of it is like preservatives, fragrance, blah, blah, all this kind of stuff. When it's compounded at a pharmacy, you write the prescription to say, I'll have a 1% retinol, please, held in aqueous cream or something, water-based cream, whatever it might be. And that's it. There's actually nothing else in there. And so they're getting the same active ingredient, but with none of the crap. And that's what they take. And I'm not saying that we use retinol. Actually, we barely use retinol at all, if any. In fact, I don't think we've ever used retinol. But if they can afford it, we'll go to compounding, where we have only that one ingredient and literally nothing else. Now, the downside is it only lasts a short amount of time, sometimes 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks. But that's because it doesn't have the preservatives and things that you have in the shop. So it's give and take. So typically, we just use one product, and if they want to use it over the body as well, that's absolutely fine. It's not an issue.
I know it's a big thing where in Europe everyone always talks about like Europe's got kind of the best standards for everything, food, body products, and then you get to here and you're sort of in the middle, I guess, sort of Goldilocks range, I guess, and then you get over to America and it's terrible. And I know they're getting better. I'm curious, because you go all around the world and you do these different conferences and you speak with different people. Do you find that any one country in particular over the other? I know Europe all generally has the same standards, but do you feel that there is progression in terms of health?
No.
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 Still massively influenced by the finance.
Right.
Still a complete lack of education, how to read scientific papers.
Mm.
Um, Still, all these conferences, they're for sponsors.
Mm.
Public may not know this, but they're only for sponsors.
Mm.
There's a conference in the UK on cosmetic medicine called CCR, as an example.
Mm.
I used to speak practically every single year. I was a regular there.
Mm.
And then one year I thought, do you know what? I'll submit my own ideas instead of speaking for other people.
Mm.
And I submitted some ideas about, why this doesn't actually work as well as you think, why this is actually pretty bad, how this actually ages you instead of being anti-aging. I thought, I'm sure they'll be interested because it's the truth.
Mm.
None of them got accepted
Mm.
because it upsets sponsors.
Right.
And so you never really get to talk at conferences properly. That's why I set up my YouTube channel.
Mm.
I'm not paid by anyone. I don't take any sponsorship. If I recommend something, it's because I use it.
Yeah.
I'm not being paid to say anything.
Mm.
And so I can speak my mind. And so when you look at the fact that this is where doctors get continuing education, which they have to, but it's all sponsored, what the hell's the point then?
Mm.
Like you're just feeding them what you want them to know.
Yeah.
So they buy your product or prescribe your drug
Mm.
or whatever. Like this is a complete joke. Like medical education is a complete and utter joke.
Mm.
It's just the blind leading the blind.
Has it found its way into universities as well? I know that's a big problem in America with
Yeah.
medical degrees being sponsored by, you name the company.
I mean, I don't know about whether it's outright explicitly sponsored by a company. However, even the tutors haven't got a clue what they're talking about in a lot of situations, because even the tutors teach you got to give this drug to do that. There's no medical university in the world that teaches the students to first ask, what do you eat? That for me is the first thing I say. Give me your diet history. Like once you give me 2 weeks of what you're eating, let's then book the first appointment. So I've got time to see what we're actually working with. And until that happens, no, it's not going to be good enough. And universities, they are there partly for political reasons in terms of getting people into the medical system, which the pharmaceutical companies obviously are heavily involved in. It's not a conspiracy or anything, but if there's no profit there, nothing's going to happen, because at the end of the day, it is a business. I get that.
Yeah.
I'm not for nationalized or socialized medicine, because a doctor is the same as you. They need to feed their family. They need money to feed their kids. Like that. I completely get that, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But at university, like they're just not incentivized to be up to date on what they do. And if you start to teach doctors that you need to ask them what they're eating and correct what they're eating, and then you see the problem goes away, I'm sorry, but the pharmaceutical company is going to find some way to get that out there, because then they realize they've got no money, because no pharmaceutical company has ever cured a disease.
Yeah.
They just cover the symptoms up.
I guess I've actually got a picture of it over there. It's Women Are Free. It was the Torches of Freedom movement. And it was when women finally had the freedom and the right to smoke. And women can do it now, which is fantastic. And you always hear about like the sort of 50s and 60s. Doctors recommend Lucky Strike. But what was it? It was in the 70s or the 80s. There was the big study on fats, which got people scared of fats throughout the 90s and sort of early noughties. And then you found out that was sponsored by Coca-Cola, because they knew that sugar was bad for people, so they were steering away the fear of sugar for fat instead. And now we know that that's not true. So you feel like we're still living. It's much more subtle than doctors recommend Lucky Strike, but we're still living in the era of medical studies being sponsored by big companies to promote their own products.
Yeah. I mean, it's also partly because of political votes, right? At the end of the day, if the government came out today and said, I really don't know who's prime minister now in the UK, it's a joke as well. I don't know if Keir Starmer's still in or if Andy Burnham's
he's
still there.
Andy Burnham's on the way.
Okay, so if Keir Starmer came out and said, or Trump came out and said, you know what, we got the guidelines wrong since the 1980s, and actually you should have been eating this. The amount of uproar is going to be atrocious. I mean, we know what happened in the world 6 years ago at the time of recording, and then the lack of trust that people now have in governments all around the world.
Or medical science,
Yeah, exactly. And if you come out and say, actually, these are the proper guidelines, people are going to sit there and go, that's the opposite of what you told us before.
Yeah, and it depends on who's saying it as well. There was what was it that people were taking? Because there was all the talk about autism, and they're still studying vaccines. But what was the they told pregnant women not to take. Sorry,
thalidomide.
Yeah.
They said it was perfectly safe.
Yeah.
To do it, and then the babies were born with deformed limbs.
Right.
Like it was awful. And so we have a history of governments just completely getting it wrong. And why do we think suddenly now they know how to read the papers and do experimentation properly? No, they don't. It's exactly the same as before. And that's why when the diet guidelines changed recently in America, it didn't go carnivore,
Mhm.
but it was in the carnivore direction.
Yeah.
And if it was any more in the
Mm.
direction, it'd be too big of a change.
Mhm.
And people would think, what the hell is going on here?
Mm. Mm.
My prediction, for the record, is they will change again
Mm.
and become even more towards carnivore.
Mm.
And I think the reason they didn't do it initially is because it can't be too different than what it already is. It has to be a slow, progressive change
Mm.
as opposed to a complete opposite. To them, people go, right, well, I'm not going to listen to anything you say now.
Yeah, which is difficult as well because that whole the food pyramid thing. I think it was the Kellogg's company that basically,
Something like that, yeah.
yeah, because it
And
was a
they
bunch of
came,
scientists studied it, and then they, before releasing it to the public, they went to all the companies that produce all the
yeah,
carbs, and they were like, how do we do this? And they were like, this is the food pyramid. And I remember seeing it in school when I was a
yeah,
kid.
yeah, I
Like
did.
everything else, most things I learnt when I was a kid are entirely wrong.
Yeah, absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. And even the idea that breakfast is the most important meal of the day,
Mm.
that doesn't even make any sense.
Get your Fruit Loops.
Yeah,
Mm.
didn't a cereal company come up with that?
Mm.
Like that's ridiculous.
Mm.
Even the idea that diamonds are a girl's best friend,
Oh
and
God.
like that was De Beers,
Yeah.
like
De
making
Beers and the
diamonds.
Blood Diamonds, and they're
Yeah,
still the richest diamond company.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like there's enough diamonds on Earth for everyone to have one,
Mm. Mm.
but because the supply is controlled,
Mm.
the demand goes up.
Yeah.
Like this,
The crazy thing about that was when they did it in Japan, because it was the
ah,
Western thing.
okay,
And so they made it, diamonds. Yeah, it was Diamonds Are Forever, the whole
yeah,
James Bond thing. And Japan traditionally did not have a sort of romantic culture.
yeah,
It was arranged marriages,
yeah,
but they did it so well that they started propagandizing this. And you can see it. It's like an 80s commercial. You can watch it on YouTube, and it was Japan, and it was a sort of Western style marriage, and it was a man producing the ring and the
yeah,
woman being like, and then it was Diamonds Are Forever, De Beers,
yeah.
and they've got it everywhere
Yeah,
now.
absolutely.
Mm.
So even the idea of Christmas.
Mm.
I'm sorry, but what are the
Mm.
popes like 350 years after after Jesus'
Mm.
time decided December 25th for some reason? We still
Mm.
don't know why.
Mm.
It's just a commercial thing.
Yeah.
Like you
Easter,
exactly.
rabbits and chocolate.
Like
And
Easter is supposed to be in Christianity. I'm not a religious person, but from what I understand, it's a way to remember Jesus when he was dying on the cross for everyone else's
yeah,
sins.
it was when Jesus came back
Oh,
after the
right.
3
Okay.
days,
Yeah.
because it
The
was when Jesus
resurrection.
was risen.
Yeah. Now, imagine I'm going to steal something from Carl Pilkington here.
Mm.
Imagine Jesus was on the cross
Mm.
and all the crowd were on the hill, they're watching him, and they said, "We're going to remember you."
Mm.
And Jesus went, what are you going to do?
Mm.
And I went, "We're going to have egg."
Mm.
And like, "You what?"
Mm.
Like, what's,
Chocolate rabbit.
yeah.
Remember me.
Hell.
Yeah, I know.
So
Yeah.
many things are just commercialized, and
Mm.
we've really got to look past that.
Mm. Mm.
You don't have to be as weird as me. Like, I don't even celebrate my own birthday because I find it's just celebrating the orbit for no reason. You don't have to go that far,
Mm.
but you do have to really think twice about what you're actually doing.
Mm.
And that comes back to nutrition as well.
Yeah.
And when it comes to these guidelines and these assumptions, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. You've got to have cereal, blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
Just question it.
Yeah.
Like you've got to think of everything as, is it actually true?
Mm. Mm. On that topic, last thing I want to round off with
Yeah.
is nicotine
Yeah.
and now nootropics.
Yeah.
Because nootropic pouches and gummies and liquids and powders are becoming really popular.
Yeah.
From what I hear, a lot of them are basically useless. There's a lot about lion's mane that I heard about, because now you see it on everything. Get your lion's mane drink, and actually, it's not that well studied, and it might produce some effects in rats, but in humans, it didn't actually show anything. So they always say with mushrooms may give you mental clarity
effect,
or whatever. I know you've spoken a bit about nicotine and that nicotine pouches, for example.
Yeah.
There's still vascular problems. You don't get the health problems that you get with smoking, for example, because you're not literally taking in toxins. And
exactly.
there's a different debate about that. But I'm curious what you think about nicotine itself.
A very, very interesting molecule.
Mm.
I don't think we fully understand it yet. I absolutely do not understand it fully yet. But I think nicotine versus smoking is a completely different debate.
Yeah.
And I think there is some data that makes us really question what we think we know about nicotine.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some association with positive outcomes. However, the difficulty, again, is experimental control.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm perfectly willing to accept that there is associated data showing nicotine to be a helpful molecule.
Mm-hmm.
However, how much of that association can then be further explored to be shown to be causation? I don't know. I'm very open to looking at it, though.
Mm.
When it comes to the nootropics, I think it's a complete farce. Because if you take something and it makes you feel better, the question to ask is, why were you not functioning at that optimal rate in the first place? What were you doing in your life that dropped your optimal rate or functional rate to the point where you took this, whatever it was, and it brought it back up? Why don't you just address what dropped you in the first place? And so if you take like an iron deficiency, if you take a supplement that gives you iron, oh, this is amazing. No. Why don't you just ask why you were lacking that in the first place? And so if your brain function has improved with whatever thing you're taking, why don't you look at what caused it to drop in the first place? And it is a drop because otherwise it won't be able to improve. You won't be able to go back to where you were. And so that's why, for me, none of these things have a nutritional control. And I suspect, and it's only a suspicion, no evidence, I suspect that if you gave these supplements to people who had no anti-nutrients in their diet and no carbohydrate intake in their diet and were just purely eating the essentials and everything was functioning fantastically, probably have no effect or possibly a negative effect. And so when all these things come along and say, this helps you, like even creatine, how many experiments have been done where the nutritional control was adequate? Zero. If creatine improves your brain function, why was your brain function down in the first place? What are you doing to yourself? That's the right way to think about it. And I think the commercialization of the lack of optimal metabolic functioning is not right. Actually, the best thing to do is, if you want to take it and try it and see if there's an improvement, to see if you're capable of performing higher, fine. But then don't rely on it and give a company your money all the time. Figure out what was wrong to not make you function at that rate in the first place anyway. That's my view on it.
What would you recommend to people who want to get better then? Very simple.
Very simple. I would say, number one, the things that you can do that make the most impact on your health and longevity are either free or low cost. Never, ever feel that you've got to spend a whole load of money on stuff. If you want to spend expensive amounts of money on nutraceuticals, absolutely fine.
Sure.
But as supplements and the basics, absolutely not. I think the biggest things that make a difference to your health and longevity, in no particular order, the diet that you eat has to be appropriate for the genes that we have, for the biochemistry that we have. For me, that's carnivore, or as close as possible you can get to it. Adequate amount of sleep so that you wake up rested and you're not falling asleep throughout the day. Adequate amounts of sunshine at appropriate times of the day. And they go hand in hand, so you're sleeping at the right sort of time and day-wake cycle. You should always stay physically active and try to build muscle mass where possible without using performance-enhancing drugs and doing it as naturally as possible. You want to make sure that you have a good social life around you, because we are social creatures and we've got to look at that as well. They, for me, are the sort of main 5 basic things. And practically none of them cost any money. And yes, it may be expensive to buy certain types of meat, but actually if you speak to your butcher and buy in bulk, it can be even cheaper than your standard weekly shop. And so that, for me, is the biggest thing that is always going to help people's health.
Sure. Great. This has been lovely. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Let people know where they can find your channel, website, all that good stuff.
So if you just type in dr.abs into Instagram, you'll find me there. And if you just type in Dr. Abs into YouTube, I should come up pretty easily there. I don't have Twitter, or X as it's called. That's how old I am. I don't have TikTok or anything. Really just YouTube and Instagram is what I have. And my website is drabs.clinic.
The first time I found your channel, I saw Dr. Abs and I thought it was going to be some like
six-pack
pre-workout. Yeah. And I tell people, they're like, who are you interviewing? And I'm like, Dr. Abs. And they're like, oh God. And I'm like, no, stop what you think.
And the worst thing is, if I type it out fully, it spells drabs. Which is really bad.
It's good to have the full stop.
Yes, exactly. My website is drabs.clinic.
Great.
And people don't realize it's a doctor.
Drabs. Amazing. All right. This has been great, mate. Thank you. This has been lovely.
Thank you for having me. It's really privileged to be here and share things to people. So thank you.
Great. Yeah. Check out your channel because it's so useful. I watch it all the time. It's good. Check out other people as well. Get a wide spread of everything.